without any further ado, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, all members of the Jamaica Association of Sports Medicine, also all visitors. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Dr. Diallo Brown. I'm the education co-chair, or one of the co-chairs of the education committee of the JSM. With me, I have Mr. Fabian Miller, who should be somewhere there, who is the other co-chair of our education committee. Welcome to, sorry, can you guys hear me, by the way? Let me just make sure my sound is good. Okay, good. All right, welcome to another one of our continuing education series that we call Keeping Pace. We have these sessions periodically throughout the year. I usually have about 4 every year. So this is our 3rd one for this year. And this one is actually being hosted by the Western branch of the JSM. So without much further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Malanda Thomas, President of the Western branch of JSM. Go right ahead, Mr. Thomas. Take it over.
Good afternoon to everybody. I want to thank you, Diallo, for welcome.
You're welcome,
and
sir.
Just want to give you an idea of what we're going to be having today. We're going to have 3 presenters. We'll be looking at the topic load management and its importance in the adolescents. And we're going to have it from the physiological and psychological perspective. After each presenter, we're going to have question and answers. So I'm going to ask if you just hold the questions until the presenter has completed their presentation, and then we give you the opportunity. For those who would like to text their questions, they can do so. We have somebody monitoring those avenues so that at the end we'll acknowledge those questions as well. For those watching on YouTube, likewise. All right. We're going to start off quickly because we want to be finished by 5 o'clock. So we're going to ask RJ McIntosh to just introduce first speaker to us, and then we get into the meat of the matter. Before that, let's open in a word of prayer. Our God and our Father, we know that nothing is possible without thee. And we appreciate the association on a whole for this, the effort that we're putting in terms of keeping persons knowledgeable on the importance of sports medicine and the impact it has on our athletes. We just thank you for this avenue, this Keeping Pace seminar. We just ask that it will reach a wide audience and that it will benefit us as a whole, as a country. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I was saying I'm going to ask RJ McIntosh to introduce our first speaker. RJ.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, or should I say good afternoon. Our first speaker is Jamie Barnes. He's a graduate of the University of the West Indies School of Physical Therapy, and he holds an associate degree in natural science from Cornell College. He has been a staff PT at the Cornell Regional Hospital since 2019, and he has been a member of the Jamaica Association of Sports Medicine since 2019, and he is currently the Vice President of the Western Branch. Jamie has provided services at Rega Marathon, Milo Western Relay, Special Olympics, and other activity of the Western Branch. As a member of the Western Branch Education Committee, Jamie suggested we look at the effect of multiple stressors on the growing athletes during their high school years, that is transitioning from level 4 to level 1 athletics. Thus, the topic this evening, load management and the importance to the adolescent athletes of physiologic perspective. Here is Jamie.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Mack, for introducing. As she said, we'll be looking at load management and its importance of physiological perspective.
Excuse me, Mr. Thomas, you want to share screen?
Yeah, sorry about that. Mr. Thomas will be sharing the presentation, and it's starting. All right, good. So some objectives, you can skip to the next one. So some objectives we'll be looking to complete this afternoon will be a look at the growing athlete, changes in puberty, some cardiovascular changes, anaerobic capabilities of the young athlete, concepts of load, overload, and recovery, and musculoskeletal issues related to load, overload, and recovery. So just a brief look at those. So if we take a look at the growing athlete, we can see that they're unique at every stage of their development. And this can be in their speed, their strength, endurance, coordination, mobility, and flexibility. So the maturity of bone, muscle, nerve, and organ development will dictate their physiological and performance capacities. And before the age of 5 years, there are very few differences that we can see in response to exercise between boys and girls. But after the age of 5, there tend to be sex-related differences that might appear. So if we take a look at the image, we can see it's an image of growing bones. Taking a look at the adolescent bone, we can see that there's epiphyseal cartilage, articular cartilage, and certain things you need to understand is that the linear growth during childhood and adolescence occurs by growth of cartilage at the end plates of the long bones. And this is followed by endochondral bone formation, and the width of bones increases with periosteal apposition. So there tends to be a coordination between cells, so osteoclasts and osteoblasts, being that osteoclasts tend to eat up bone, in terms of layman terms, eat up bone so it can be reshaped in stronger to handle more mechanical stress, so something that is important to the athlete, and osteoblasts, which will build up bones. So the next slide. So in early and adolescent years, muscles and bones tend to grow more quickly. And because of this, they're more vulnerable during this period. And this is due to the fact that they are not yet fully ossified, and repetitive strain on them can cause malformation and injury. So with regular training, muscles will tend to develop more quickly than skeletons and can put unusual stress on the skeleton. So muscle will grow more quickly in the young athlete than in the non-athlete due to training loads. So because muscle will also grow more quickly in the young athlete than in the non-athlete due to training loads, this ironically can cause long-term injury than in, let's say, a sedentary adolescent. And healing tends to be quicker in the young athlete than in an adult. So injury time away from training can often be less. So the areas which tend to have more rapid growth velocity are usually the back and the lower legs. And these areas may show decreased muscle strength during the time of growth, along with tightness and lack of neuromuscular coordination, in the changing muscles impacting on general coordination. And example of this would be hand-eye coordination and response reflexes, which will often result in a higher risk of injury for the athlete. So some changes that we might see in puberty, which is on the next slide, is that for boys, there will be an increase in strength once puberty has passed, and peak strength in boys will be around the age of 20 years. And this strength can be built upon over a period of years to optimize the strength and power once maturity has been reached. So coordination will also change once puberty has been reached, as until that time, myelination of nerves is incomplete. And myelination here would allude to the fact that myelin sheath allows for electrical impulses to transmit more quickly and efficiently along the nerve cells. And if myelin is damaged, these impulses might slow down. And in this case, it might not be damaged, but it's incomplete. So impulses might not be transmitted efficiently. But once it is achieved, quicker muscle fiber recruitment is also achieved. And for the next slide. So in girls, the changes will be the same after puberty, but there will be a more gradual change for them as the length of time from the beginning to the end of puberty is longer in girls. In terms of cardiovascular function, we can see that cardiovascular function will improve in a direct correlation to lung size. So therefore, the bigger the child is, the better their cardiovascular function might be. So lung volume increases until growth is completed as well. And we can see that a smaller heart and lungs and less mature muscles would be a disadvantage for the athlete. Blood flow to active muscles during exercise can be greater in children than in adults, and this is because there is less peripheral resistance. So the smaller heart size and total blood volume may result in lower stroke volumes. So consequently, the lower stroke volumes will result in the heart having to beat more quickly or work harder to get the same amount of oxygen saturated blood to the working muscle than a heart with a larger stroke volume. So heart rate at submax aerobic work will be higher in the young athlete than in the adult. And if you look at the aerobic and anaerobic capabilities of the young athlete compared to that of the adult, we can see that the lung size and heart size will increase with growth, and therefore VO2 max will also increase. And VO2 max here is just the maximum rate of oxygen consumption that is attainable during physical exertion. So the young athlete will have a more limited ability to perform anaerobic type activities and cannot achieve adult concentrations of lactate in either muscle or blood for maximal and supramaximal rates of exercise. And when the body has plenty of oxygen, pyruvate is shuttled to an aerobic pathway to be further broken down for more energy. And when oxygen is limited, the body temporarily converts pyruvate into lactate, which allows for glucose breakdown and thus energy production to continue. An accumulation of lactate and therefore lower lactate thresholds will occur at lower running pace compared to that of an adult, and children cannot maintain as fast a running pace due to economy of effort and a lower lactate threshold. We'll be looking at the concepts in load, overload, and recovery. So we can say, what is load? So a load is any measure of intensity of training session or how much stress is placed on the body during that session. So a variety of factors can affect the response to load. So load can be measured by factors such as the number of pitches thrown, distance run, length of a season or a session, hours of training, and or the amount of weight that is lifted. So excessive training may be placed on an athlete, and that can increase their risk of injury, illness, and decreased performance. And in some cases, undertraining for the expected demands of activity and or competition may also leave an athlete susceptible to injury and decreased performance. So what is overload now? So overload occurs when the balance between external load and internal load is altered so that the body's adaptive capacity or capability is inadequate, resulting in manifestations of altered performance and or injury or illnesses. So there can be an absolute load in which even if the body is well conditioned, the load is too high. Example, the athlete is lifting too much weight. There may also be relative load in which the load is normal, so the athlete can manage the load, but there is impaired capacity. So example, running sprints with a hamstring injury. So the next slide, we can see that there are some consequences of overload. So medical issues may result from too much load, too intense training, or increased training intensity for athletes not properly conditioned to the load stimulus. Next slide. And some changes that might occur So multiple systems might be impacted. So we can see changes in the cardiovascular system, respiratory system, and hormonal systems. Taking a look at the cardiovascular system, we can see that resting heart rate typically decreases with fitness and can be elevated or reduced in overtraining. So athletes' achievable heart rate max will decrease. Heart rate variability, or summarized as HRV or abbreviated, or beat-to-beat variability has been used as a measure of overload. And if HRV is decreased in the overtrained athlete, so HRV is simply the time between heartbeats. In the respiratory system, there tends to be that So in the respiratory system, respiratory exchange is lower in the overtrained athlete, as is VO2 max. And as previously stated, VO2 max is simply the maximum rate of oxygen consumption during physical exertion. So if we take a look at the hormones now, so single hormonal measure cannot be used to diagnose overtraining, but many are affected by acute and chronic training. So one that might be affected includes norepinephrine. So increased norepinephrine may be seen in the overtrained athlete. So what does norepinephrine do? So norepinephrine together with adrenaline tends to increase heart rate and blood pumping from the heart. It also increases blood pressure and helps to break down fat and increase blood sugar levels and provide more energy to the body. So one might ask, what will happen if norepinephrine levels are too high? So if norepinephrine is too high, we tend to see that it promotes anxiety, high blood pressure, and heart rate, and organ stress. High norepinephrine levels can also result in disturbed sleep, high blood sugar, and headaches. Cortisol might also be impacted, so it is altered. So you can think of cortisol as the body's natural built-in alarm system. So if we find that cortisol is affected, it's our main stress hormone. It works with certain parts of the brain to control mood, motivation, and fear. So acute strain usually causes an elevation in cortisol, while chronic strain usually leads to decreased levels. We can move to the next slide. So some musculoskeletal issues that might be related to load, overload, and recovery. So for overload, injuries occur when the athlete is inadequately prepared for the stress on the muscle, tendon, bone units to manage training and competition. Mechanical stresses on either soft tissue or bone that exceed the ability to protect and restore the damage resulting from excessive load will result in microscopic and macroscopic damage. So we can see that we have positive adaptations or maladaptations. So the positive adaptations, we'll see that it will result in strengthening of the soft tissue or bone. And with maladaptations, there may be injury to tendon, muscle injury, or bone stress injuries. For the next slide, we can see that there are some types of injury that might occur. We have bone stress injuries or BSI, physical injuries, muscle injury, or tendon injury. Stay on this slide for a minute. If we take a look at bone stress injuries, we'll see that bone stress injuries will result from limited time for recovery, causing an imbalance in osteoblast and osteoclast activity. And we had stated previously that osteoclasts will tend to eat up bone while osteoblasts will build them up. And the fact that osteoclasts work to increase the mechanical stresses that the bone will be placed upon. So when bone homeostasis is not maintained due to abrupt or persistent training or competition stresses, the ability of osteoblasts to now lay down a new bone is exceeded by the resorptive activity of the osteoclast in remodeling the cortex. So the resulting cortical weakening that will manifest first as a stress reaction, with the spectrum continuing to stress fractures and ultimately to an acute fracture if it's not addressed. If we take a look at physical injuries, so the physis is simply the growth plate of the bone. The device is particularly susceptible to load and overload injuries in the skeletally immature athlete. So traction loads and repetitive tensile loads to the apophysis may also result in injury. And the apophysis is just a normal developmental outgrowth of the bone, which arises from separate ossification centers and fuses to the bone later in development. So muscle injury might also occur. Muscle and myocytes will also respond adversely to chronic overload. And this overload leads to reduced muscular force, development, and reduced contraction velocity. Tendon injuries. Tendinopathies can occur when the tenocytes are unable to manage and recover from an excessive load. So when abrupt or persistent load is applied to the tendon units in excess of the healing capacity of the fibroblasts and tenocytes, the tendons will tend to break down and manifest as a tendinopathy. And the tendon units crossing two joints appear to be particularly susceptible to constant functioning in the eccentric mode of activity. This is the end of my section. Thank you for joining. We'll move to the moderators. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jamie Barnes. All right, so we looked at some physiological changes that we note in the adolescents that are involved in sports and the impact it can have on them if the load management is not applied correctly. So at this point, I'm going to open the floor. I'm going to ask that if anybody has any questions, they can go ahead and ask at this time. As well as I'm going to ask Dr. Diallo to check and see if there are any questions that came through via Zoom, and Fabian to check if there are any questions via YouTube.
I'm seeing one hand up, Mr. Rory Alvarenga, Coach Rory Alvarenga. One hand up.
Good evening, everyone. Grisham, Mr. Grisham in Grenada, we did say local body, but I've always expanded to the region. One of the things that I noticed, while Jamaica is a track and field country, I'm a swim coach, and in swimming, the girls hit puberty before the boys, and we train them separately. You know, a lot of times we mistaken that they're not young adults, and some people train them like young Olympians, young adults, when they're not taking the fun out of it. But the girls in swimming tend to hit puberty before the boys. That's why even at the World Junior Championships, the highest age a girl can be is 17, while a boy can be 18. How do you then monitor the loads? I want to learn more on top of what I already do. The load for the girls versus the boys in swimming, please.
Yeah, Mr. Brown, that's for you, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, I think load monitoring would fall under my section of the presentation.
Okay. All right.
Okay, I'll await then. You know, I was listening and I heard the boys, the girls, the boys, the girls, but I know, and for the reason, by the time you get to your production at the world levels, you'll find that the girls cut off ages 17, but the boys are allowed to swim at age 18 because the girls tend to, you know, mature faster than the boys, no fault of theirs. I'll wait until your presentation.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Anybody else has any other questions?
Not seeing any other questions.
This is
Oh,
Leon Taylor. I'm with baseball, and it's so true. I looked at when you were explaining about the muscles and the strain on the muscles, because we've got some coaches here who tend to have the kids run, because running is a big part of baseball, and also baseball has introduced at the little league level what you call pitch counts, right? Because if you don't have pitch counts for children in different age category, you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of injury to arms, right? And there's a lot of rotator cuff injuries that applies. And again, certain pitches, you don't teach a kid to pitch a ball like a curveball at a certain age, because much damage can be done to those muscles. So it's good that you're portraying this, because I can bring this to the coaches to say, well, hey, don't run these kids so hard. Don't let them have fun. And at the same time, when they're in competition, there's a strict pitch count that we have to adhere to.
hello?
Yep.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Mr. Taylor.
So my question to you is, baseball is relatively new and is really a non-traditional sport, right? So, we'd love to get words out to these coaches as to, you mentioned about the overtrain and excessive training, and I see a lot of that happening in baseball. So it's good to really stress these. I can take this information back to these coaches and explain to them that, though their intentions are good, the damage will be done. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Well, Mr. Taylor, one of the things they can do is get in contact with us at the Jamaica Association of Sports Medicine. That's what we do. So and then this forum, this educational forum, is part of that. And of course, we'd be happy to get in touch with you and fellow baseball coaches to speak further. That's definitely something that we can talk about, because I do know everything of pitch counts. I know the injuries, shoulder injuries, elbow injuries, UCL injuries, and so on in baseball. So yeah, we're aware of the whole thing of pitch counts to kind of prevent that. Definitely, just get in touch with us at the Sports Medicine Association. We'll be happy to do that.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Most welcome.
All right, I have a question. Mr. Barnes, so you were speaking earlier to the maladaptations that can occur, right, with overload. And my question is, do some of these maladaptations, well, the first question is, it's directly caused by the fact that the load management wasn't applied appropriately? That's the first question, is yes or no. And two, does it impact the extent to which this athlete can eventually develop? For example, does it cause an athlete to plateau earlier than if you want to put their true potential per se? I just want to hear your take on it.
Oh yeah. If we look at the maladaptations that might happen, yes, to your first question, and with the presence
Speak
of
into your mic.
You're not hearing?
Yeah, what you so clear a while ago. Go right ahead now, yes.
Oh yes, I was saying that to the first question, yes. And then with the maladaptations and the constant muscle injury or tendon injury or the bone injuries, yes, it will eventually lead to, I believe, early plateauing. Because as we had seen that sometimes if they can manage the load, but the presence of injury will lead to them not being able to completely manage the load. So as we, like when we discuss the presence of, I'm looking for the slide. Yeah, so like when in the what is overload, and we had said that there is relative overload and absolute overload, and then with the relative overload, yes, the load is normal, but the body's capacity is diminished. So example, as I said, running with hamstring injury. So the presence of injuries that probably might not be fully healed, or they are not yet, or they haven't gone through proper rehab. Yes, the maladaptations will result in the athlete plateauing early.
All right, thank you. And that's something I think we want to point to, because I think it's very important that our audience understand that. And I think I don't want to go too much into it, but I believe that this issue of loading may be one of the reasons why, you know, some of our well-performing athletes at this stage don't really transition into the more elite. But then that's just my take on it, and we have more presenters that will share their opinion on it. One more question I would have is the slide that you're talking about, what is overload? You mentioned something about a balance between, I think it was external. Let me get back to it. You have that slide in front? External load, the balance between external load and internal load. You can share a little bit more light on that.
So with the external load, we can, because we said that load can be measured in factors such as the number of pitches thrown, the distance run, the length of the session.
We're still not hearing you, Jamie.
Not hearing?
No,
now?
We're hearing, but it's a little low.
It's low.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. 1 minute. No?
Yes, that's better.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so we had discussed that load is, or it can be measured by factors such as the number of pitches thrown, the distance run, the length of a season or a session, or the hours of training, and the amount of weight that is lifted. So that would be the external load. And if the balance between that and the body's capacity to manage that load, which would be then, are their muscles developed enough for these loads that they're going through? So that would be the internal load, the muscle, the bone, the tendon, how they respond to it. If there isn't a balance between them, then they might be susceptible to injury or overtraining.
All right, thank you. So basically then, if there are coaches here on the avenue, then it's important for them to understand that, especially during puberty, I think you're mentioning that if they're not careful of the external load, which I believe they can influence and control better, then they might cause too much of an imbalance with the external and the internal. And then that's going to lead to the maladaptations and the injuries. All right, so I think we're going over a bit into the next presenter.
No, you're not.
All right.
Just about time.
Okay, all right, good. So anybody else has any other questions, or that's it? All right, so I want to thank you.
There's a question on Zoom, Mr. Thomas.
Mr. Diallo?
Yes. Coach Avarango once again asking, how do we know when the athletes are entering overload? I'm not sure that's going to be for Mr. Barnes or maybe Mr. Gale next. But how do we know when the athletes are entering overload?
I mean, I'm coach. To not complicate your question, you know, your last series, Dr. Brown, we spoke about psychological, and I learned a lot there, including just looking at the signs, right? But an athlete should be able to recover from one session to the next, and that is nutrition and enough sleep. I can't monitor that. How do you, the coach, the track and field coach, take my sport out of it, or the baseball coach? What signs do we look forward, that we are bordering overload? Because we all know when major competitions are near, we tend to increase. And with increased work comes increased nutrition, increased sleep. What signs do we have on deck on pitch when we don't know the diet and the rest pattern?
All right. I believe that question will be best answered by the next presenter. Am I correct?
It sounds that way to me as well, possibly.
Yeah.
Never
So
mind.
Yeah,
I'm gonna,
that would be my question to answer. I can
Right.
answer it now, or if you want to wait, we can go through the presentation.
I think we should go to the presentation
Right.
and then, all right. So at this point, thank you very much, Mr. Barnes, for your presentation. It was very informative and we appreciate it. Without further ado, we're going to ask RJ McIntosh to now introduce our next presenter to us.
Okay. Our next presenter is Romario Gale. Again, a graduate of the University Hospital of the West Indies Physical Therapy Program, as well as the Masters of Science program in Sports Medicine and Exercise Physiology. He has been a staff physical therapist at Cornell Regional Hospital and the owner manager of One Stop Physical Therapy Services. Romario has been a member of the Jamaica Association of Sports Medicine since 2016 and a member of the Western Branch Executive since its relaunch in 2019. His special interests are health promotion and his involvement with the Jamaica Moves program. He's also active in sports. He runs, he plays volleyball, and he plays football. Romario will now address injuries related to load management, its prevention and management. Romario Gale.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Romario.
All right. Everyone see my screen?
Yep, perfectly.
All right. Great.
Yes.
So as it was said, I'll be dealing with injuries related to load management, right? Looking at how to prevent as well as how to manage, right? So we'll be going through the background of Mr. Barnes covered load already. So we'll just be expounding on how the different factors play in terms of management. Then we'll be looking at mitigation, understanding the athlete and how that plays out in the training cycles, as well as prevention, management as a coach, and from a physiotherapy perspective, right? And then the references will be at the end, right? So the IOC statement, right? The IOC's consensus statement on load management defines it as the sport and non-sport burden, single or multiple physiological, psychological, or mechanical stressors as a stimulus that is applied to the human biological system, including subcellular elements, a single cell, tissue, one or multiple organ system, or the individual as a whole. Load can be applied to the individual human biological system over a varying time period, varying from seconds, minutes, hours to days, weeks, months, and years, with a varying magnitude of duration, frequency, and intensity. That's a mouthful. So load management includes, right? In order to manage anything, you have to have a measure of what you're managing. So it's the measure and monitoring of not only the sport and non-specific sport loads of the athlete, but also the athlete's performance, emotional well-being, symptoms, and their injuries. So the question was asked earlier, how do you tell when you're entering into overload? Performance will be there. Every sport has their performance metric. Whether it's baseball, the pitch speed will decrease. If it's running, your running time will increase. If it's swimming, your lap time will increase. There are measures within the sport, specific to the sport. And if you know your athlete, you'll know that this athlete normally runs faster, normally pitch faster, normally swims faster than they normally would do. Then there is how the emotional well-being. So they are running fast, but yet at the end of that race, they are not excited to run that fast. That indicates that they are emotionally overloaded and the pressure to perform is taking a toll. While they are getting a performance, they are not satisfied because their mental well-being and emotional well-being is being strained. And then you have the symptoms. They'll complain of feeling tired, feeling burnt out, etc., etc. The common complaints that normally present. And then finally, the telltale sign would be an injury that the coach probably has a difficulty figuring where did that injury come from. But then the injury comes up. And that is often an indication of where the external load exceeds the internal capacity of the body. So in load management, you're controlling the training loads in order to enhance performance and lower the risk of injury, right? So when you're training your athlete, yes, you're progressively overloading them, but you're not overloading them to the point of injury, where their injury risk increased based on what the training volume would have been for that week or that day. So if insufficient load is applied, we all know that you would not elicit the desired result. So we're not saying that, okay, be very nice and gentle with this athlete, don't give them too much, but at the same time, you don't want to underload them. So you want to still achieve that desired effect of progressive overload and attain that strength. So external load is the external stimulus applied to the athlete, such as work completed, distance run, or weight lifted. While on the other hand, internal load is the individual psychological and physiological response to the external load, right? So let's touch on that. The physiological response to the external load. So you have muscle tissue, bone, and the ligaments and tendons, right? Each of those have their own response to the stimulus, right? Collagen has its response, muscle has its response, bone has its response, right? As we go forward, you'll see the different responses, and we'll touch on that in the slide. So for tendons, right? This is coming from the experience of we're coming out of the pandemic and a lot of persons were at home sitting, not doing much, not keeping active, yet they want to return to their pre-competition level without that previous repetitive building up, right? So with tendons, a lack of exposure to adequate levels of physiological stress over a prolonged time period or underloading may paradoxically predispose to overload injury, right? So for the coaches that are here, this is a big point to make note of because some of your athletes are coming out of the pandemic. They were underactive, at home sitting. They were elite athletes before, and in their mind, they're still elite athletes. But over the past year or two, they would not have been getting that tendon exposure to help to strengthen that tendon to manage the elite workload that they think they can manage. So that is something that we have to factor in mind as coaches and as rehab specialists. An underloaded tendon may become unable to cope with increased demands imposed on it. That is very important because a lot of the tendonitis that would be experienced from preseason building up into the early part of the season would be because those athletes were at total rest, right? And then you increase the training volume and then you're building them up. But then the time frame and then the time of preseason makes a big difference. If it's a 2-week preseason, that is not enough time for the tendon to respond to the levels of competition that is necessary. Then we're looking at the bone stress reaction, right? The response of bone to repetitive stress is to increase osteoclastic activity over osteoblastic activity, which is new bone formation. Would you look at that? One would think that once the bone is exposed to stress, it would start to build up right away. But that is not the case. This increase over osteoclastic activity versus osteoblastic activity results in temporary bone weakening of the bone that is affected. Can you imagine that, right? So that is why periodization and controlled exposure to stress makes a big difference, because the bone doesn't respond right away as you put it on the load. It reforms itself and then it starts to build. So it's like a clean house. It assesses where it's at, then it starts to improve. Whereas we're thinking that as we stress it, it starts to improve. The eventual adaptive response is periosteal new bone formation to provide reinforcement. So note here, it says the eventual adaptive response. So it's not immediate, the eventual adaptive response. However, if physical stress continues, an osteoclastic activity may predominate, resulting in initially in microfractures, commonly seen as bone marrow edema on MRI, consistent with a stress reaction, and eventually a true cortical break or stress fracture may result. So let's unpack this. For physiotherapists, a lot of times we get access to the MRI and we see bone marrow edema and we brush it off as, oh, that was just bone bruising. No, that is subclinical bone damage, right? And that plays a role in the impact that we're going to, the way we're going to manage the athlete or person going forward, right? And eventually, we have to note that, because, for example, the athlete came through, doctors overlooked the edema. It's in a very peculiar area, and we rehab them, we strengthen them, not factoring all the things that are happening, and we return them to play. We have a true cortical break in the bone, which then presents as more painful. And then the athlete will become frustrated because they're like, I went to the doctor, I went to the physio, why am I still having pain, right? So stuff like that makes a difference. So here is the flowchart reaction of the bone. Of note, if you can see my pointer, there is this abbreviation, which I'll go into later. But just to explain it now, ACWR represents acute and chronic work rate, right? So the number here is 1.5. 1.5 is a ratio of acute workload compared to chronic workload. So for example, that number is calculated based on how much activity was done over the past 4 weeks versus how much activity is being done this week, right? And then that gives you the ratio. And the number that has been linked in studies to increases in injury is a ratio greater than 1.5, right? So excessive load, which would be the ratio greater than 1.5, then you would have your stress reaction, which would have been osteoclastic activity initially increasing over osteoblastic activity. That would then give your stress fracture. Of note, with rest, this gives the body time to react in the right way, right? So that's why too fast, too quick, too fast is often problematic. Whereas if you go slow, progressive overload, the body adjusts to the demand that is being placed on it. Right, so stress fractures in sports often happen when the muscles are too tired to take on the impact of the exercise and the bone has to absorb the added stress. Most stress fractures affect the bone in the lower leg, right? Because that's where the body is coming in contact with the ground. but it is not only limited to the lower leg, because if you do weightlifting, it can be a pars fracture of the vertebrae, and depending on whichever sport, it can also be olecranon fracture of the elbow, right? So it's not limited only to the body, but the most common mechanism seen is stress fractures of the feet. Right. So the overall background is that when external load exceeds the capacity of the tissue, the risk of injury increases, right? So mitigation, right? What my research for this presentation has found is that we have to consider the person that is in front of us, the individual as they present, not what the theory says, not only what the research says or the literature said. We have to consider the person that is in front of us. This rings true for me as well, because previously I rehabbed an athlete that came to me with a hamstring injury. And I was wondering why this person continued to have a hamstring injury despite saying he's training twice per day. Outside of training, this person plays video game up to 4 hours per day, 4 to 6 hours. So that time span between training, he's sitting in a slouch position on a sofa, unsupported. So that shows off his lumbosacral control, and that overworks his hamstring. So sedentary time makes a big difference, right? Then we go into screen time, right? Screen time affects the eyes, it affects the mental capacity, where the person would be in front of a screen.
Come on. That's your after. Come on here.
Okay, anyways, yeah, screen time. So the person
Excuse me, Romaro, sorry about that. Go right ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay, right. So the person would be in front of a screen, and that would then affect their attention span. So how long you spend in front of a screen does have an effect on your attention span. Decreased attention span lead to poor performance because you're not mentally engaged and present in what you're doing. So for the senior athletes, most would have passed this been developed developed before screen time was a thing. But then now social media is still present, right? And with social media, you're seeing so much news in a day compared to previously what someone would see in a week, right? And you're receiving so much news, so much new information that can leave you mentally and emotionally overloaded, right? You will start off the morning happy and buzzing. By the end of the day with social media, you're not your usual self, because you're comparing, you're factoring all that you've heard, and it has played a role on how your day progressed, right? So reaching training time, you're detached from what you're actually doing, and you're just going through the motion. That is something that puts you at risk for injury, because if you're not present, not paying attention to what you're doing, you are less able to react to your external environment and your external stimulus. So that is a few factors to consider when you are considering the individual and the person that is in front of us, right? Right. So to assess, okay, right. So in assessing the average sedentary time of individuals, this is data gathered from the World Health Organization by these researchers, and they found that the average adult spends approximately 8.2 hours per day in sedentary activity, right? That includes just sitting, not doing anything outside of sleeping. So for that long during the day, that is almost, well, if you work a job, that would be 8 hours of sitting. And if you don't want to work a job, that would just be you sitting for 8 hours, right? So that plays a big role when it comes to athletic performance, because most times we consider these persons as elite, but they are still human. And if they're sitting for 8.2 hours per day, when they come to training, their body is still in that sitting position. And that now has to be readjusted to optimize performance, right? So that also factors to their external load. And then as it relates to children, research has found that 12 to 13-year-old children in the United States doubled their non-school related screen time to 7.7 hours in May of 2020, compared to 3.8 hours during the day before the pandemic. So almost double increase in non-screen time. So they're on the tablet computer for school for X amount of time. And then after that, they're on it for additional 7.7 hours, right? That is a lot of screen time. That is a lot of screen time. So mentally, they have been processing a lot from school on, in addition to the additional screen time. And then from there, it adds to their external load. So external load is not just training, right? Other things are happening in the athlete's life. Then there's the generational difference, right? So there are 6 fundamental movement skills that every athlete or every person who's physically active should develop before they progress to elite levels. I've found it surprising that seeing an average person run in the past few months, seeing an average person run, you can see that there is a big difference in that person compared to those of the older years who have grown up running and their form just sticks with them, right? So you're seeing persons, the running style changing with the toe being turned out and their heel striking in abnormal patterns, increasing their risk for injury. Then we move on to jumping, just asking them to jump, the way that they load the lower limb in order to generate power. It's just off from the traditional landmarks. So we're seeing rounding at the spine when they're lowering to jump to generate that power, even throwing. And you would be surprised to know that catching isn't as easy and common as most persons would think, because you throw something to a child and think that, oh, they're supposed to catch it, and and you're like, you think it's natural because growing up you trained it and you developed it and it was just natural. Is either you're throwing mangoes, football, marble, you're throwing something. So that is a motor pattern that would have been developed. These younger persons aren't even throwing stones. The most they'll throw is their tablet on the bed, and they're prepared to catch the tablet, even if it's falling. So that's something to factor in when we're thinking of developing athlete going forward. It's no longer young and strong. It's young, developing, and athletic and physically active. So physical activity is a big precursor for athletic performance. And if the person is not physically active before entering the training block, then there is some time that will have to be spent to train these persons on these simple movements, right? And then we're looking at flexibility and posture. Us as physiotherapists, we notice this readily whenever we see somebody, the way their shoulders are, the way they carry their head and so forth. All of that plays into injury mechanism, because if you have a slouched shoulder and you're a swimmer, that is going to affect your stroke, because it's going to affect how high your hand can go to pull through to develop power when swimming. Same for a thrower. If you're a pitcher and you're going to reach back and your shoulder is here, this is probably where you're going to stop. Whereas if you have great posture, you can go all the way back and generate that force. So posture is something that has been found to be changing as well. Then we are looking at muscle strength. We often take it for granted that because someone is walking around, they are strong enough. But ask that person to do 15 to 20 squats, and you'll see the windedness, the muscle fatigue, and just the overall poor conditioning of that individual, right? I don't have it here, but for you to be considered to have a good muscle strength in a squat, for males, males 20 to 29, we're looking at between 26 to 30 squats in a minute, right? And for a female, it's 23 to 26 squats in a minute. Compare that to your average person, your average teenager going up. They are lucky to make it to 10 or make it to 10 with good form. And that makes a big difference. Then there's a coordination. See, developing athletes these days aren't as coordinated as before. And that adds to the whole mixture of everything that has to be factored in. So when an athlete comes to us, both as a coach and as a physical therapist, we have to factor that these are things that we have to look out for. Is it the case that they're coming to us for injury due to poor posture, and it wasn't just a training overload only? Or are they coming to us because of poor muscle strength? Are they coming to us because of poor coordination, right? And then from there, we factor these in our overall assessment, and no longer looking at, oh, it's a muscle strain, just give him 3 weeks and send him back out. These are things that we now have to layer on top of our training design as well as our rehabilitation design, right? So how to prevent? As a coach, I would recommend that you plan ahead, right? Planning ahead involves planning for the year. In baseball, the pitch count planning is described as you estimate how many pitches the person would throw at the peak of the season. So say semifinal to final, how many pitches, right? That would be your main picture. And that average is about 90 pitches, depending on how competitive the league is, how competitive the season is, that would be about 90 pitches, right? And then you're doing a regression model of 10% of that as you phase it down back to leading back up to preseason, right? So say 90 pitches, 10% of 90 is 81. No, it's 9, and then 9 from 90 give you 81, right? Then from there, it's a regression, all the way down to preseason. So however many months the season lasts, that is however many cycles of regression you would be going through, right? So for example, in a less developed nation, you would have like a 4-month season, right? That now means that your preseason, you have to start your preseason earlier and then build them up to that phase, because if 90 is the final month and the peak of the competition, and the 4-month regression would have you at about 60, right? And then your preseason, you're just doing 20. Then you're gonna see a sharp rise in your training in their workload entering competition. So you have to now stagger your preseason to build that load up, so that when they move from preseason to the competition load, it's not a big jump. And then your acute and chronic work ratio is not that high to create that increased injuries, right? So that's what it goes. And then it's the same for running, right? Well, for running, you taper off a little before competition, but leading up to that week, before the tapering off, you do a regression all the way back down to where the person started at, right? So plan ahead. Don't just think of the person as, oh yes, they look relatively healthy and whatever. You have to plan ahead and say, all right, this person is here, they're tolerating this load, this is where I need them to be. How can I safely increase that workload early without triggering an injury setup, right? And then you want to take an individualized approach to each athletic group. right? Because persons are competed in many sports, and then you have persons who are sedentary, who is watching the sport from outside and just wants to enter. They are very eager, but they do not have the adaptation and development as someone else. So with that person, you can't just throw them in your senior person programming. You have to factor in that individualized approach. And then what I want to say is budget for attrition. Attrition is when, or the attrition as it relates to athlete is not true dropout and not returning. Life happens, and these are developing persons. They may take a week off because something happened in their family, or they may take a week off because they wanted to focus on school and get caught up with their exams or whatever, right? But then when they return, they're returning from no activity to X amount of activity. Or even if they did something, it's a fall off from their previous workload and your plan as a coach, right? So an example would be, say for the past 4 weeks, they were doing 50 miles, and then there's this blank week there where they did nothing, right? That now factors into your acute training volume again, because you would have been thinking, okay, they did 50 last time, let's increase them to 60 or 75 miles, right? And they are coming from being sedentary. So that now affects their overall load tolerance and their risk ratio, right? And then load management and progression. There is no specific, there are specifics for each sport, but there is no one size fits all for each sport, right? The closest they have come is the 10% progression rule. So whatever the metric that your training volume needs to achieve, whether it's miles in running, laps in swimming, pitches in baseball, the general ratio is 10% increase over week on week on week, right? And then you monitor the athlete to see how they are reacting to that 10%, right? A well-trained, well-seasoned athlete with previous exposure should be able to manage that 10% increase all the way up to their final competition, or their tapering off. But for an athlete that, or a person who has not been active, that 10% may require a break or a gap to allow that person's body to react, right? Then this is the load monitoring ratio that I mentioned before. So the sweet spot as described is between 0.8 to 1.3, and anything above 1.5 is considered increased risk compared to reward, right? So for example, let's go to, right. So let's go to this example. So for example, a runner ran 30 miles in the past 4 weeks, right? And they're entering this week with the intention of doing 45 miles in a week, right? Using the ratio, it would be 7 days, which would be this week, the aim for this week, over the 28 days that previously passed, right? So this would be 45 over 30, and the answer would be 1.5. So this would be the peak, the maximum that is recommended, right? That's a 15-mile increase in 1 week compared to what they may have been doing previously, right? So this puts the body at risk for injury. Say this was to be repeated next cycle, that would then lead to stress that the body would not have yet recovered from, right? So this, yes?
Sorry to cut you. We're a little over time, so if you can maybe summarize soon.
Oh, sorry. Wow. I should have started the timer. Okay. All right. Right. So as a coach, we would encourage decreasing the workload, and if the issue persists, we would recommend referring to a physical therapist. As a coach, I also recommend that you're patient with the athlete. and don't be too hard on the athlete as you may discourage them from the sport or the whole training setup. And then for the physical therapist, the approach would be to learn what you don't know and learn what is the latest recommendation as it relates to treating the injury. And have a discussion with the coach and the athlete, as it is very important to have that discussion. So the advances in acute management of stress fractures has shifted from RISE to peace and love. Here is the abbreviation. As time has limited us, we'll not be going through it, but you can look at it to see that it emphasizes load and optimization and exercise once the person has passed out of the inflammatory phase, right? The time to heal for a stress fracture is between 6 to 8 weeks. And during that time, it is optimally recommended that low impact cardio is maintained. If they're a runner, it would be cycling. If they're in any other sport, it would be a low impact to avoid aggravating the area, right? The aims of rehabilitation would be muscular endurance and core and pelvic stability, balance and proprioceptive training, flexibility and gait training, while the person is awaiting that the body to do what it does and allow the bone to heal. And then another tip is, while strengthening in the recovery phase, bilateral is good, but also emphasize unilateral movement. And with running stress injuries, the anterior compartment of the shin is quite important as it positions the feet to take the load when running. So this picture demonstrates the position of the toe while that leg is preparing to accept load. As you can notice, the toe is in a position that would expose the metatarsal head to stress, and with repetitive activity that would continue to wear on the body. Another emphasis during the recovery phase is technique correction. So you're always assessing for risk factors and exploring other contributing factors, and then looking out for red flags. Most stress fractures occur due to relative energy deficiency. So the body is not getting enough calories in to repair what is necessary, as well as they may not be getting enough rest. They may have issues with hydration, or as a female, they may have other symptoms underlying. This goes into return to sport. Right. So return to sport after stress injury is weight bearing once it is pain-free, and then gradually increasing activities 2 to 3 weeks after pain has subsided, and then building them back up to their 30 to 35% of their 30 to 50% of their pre-injury phase over the next 3 to 4 weeks, 3 to 6 weeks. All right. And here are my references.
Okay, thank you very much. It's not yet Dr. Gear, right?
Not yet, not yet.
All right.
He's working on it.
That is right.
Very informative presentation. I really learned a lot, but I'm going to give those who may have questions the opportunity now to ask.
All right. I see a question from Mr. Omar West. Sir West, go right ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Nice presentation so far. A lot has been said about overload from both speakers, and it's been said negatively. But we know that without overload, there's no adaptation. So I'm wondering how you define overload. It sounds to me like you're defining overload kind of synonymously with overreaching. How would you define this overload?
All right, so you have progressive overload and you have physiological overload, right? So progressive overload is where you're loading the tissues, the tendons, and so forth in order to elicit that stimulus to get stronger, right? Using an example, if you are, for example, squatting, the body can progress at, say, 10% per cycle, or however, per week, based on what you're doing, right? Then you have physiological overload, where you, the coach, is progressing that aspect in the gym, but outside of that, the athlete, or however it goes, is overloading their body as a whole by not getting enough rest, not eating adequately, and not allowing their mental capacity to be engaged during the setting, right? So when I refer to overload, I am not talking about muscle overload. I'm talking about overload as it relates to the overall factors that are being combined. Yes, there is physiological overload where you're getting stronger, but then there is also mental overload, which then plays into their injuries. If you understand what I'm saying.
I got you. Thank you.
Right.
And I don't know if I could add to you, but correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gable, you were suggesting that not necessarily just overload in a sense, but the rate at which you overload is what's critical here. Right. So it's not necessarily that overloading is a bad thing. Is in terms of how you progress in terms of overloading the athlete. So that's why I enjoy the figures that you gave, and I think it's something that I'm sure the coaches would use as a guide. Because if I recall, you said 10% per week.
Right.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, how are you doing? My name is Richard James. I'm a strength and conditioning based in New York. I've been living in New York for over 20 years now and practicing strength and conditioning. I was invited here by Dr. Diallo. And first of all, I love this forum, love what you guys are doing. And I want to pitch in on this whole concept of overloading. I do understand what you two gentlemen are saying about overloading, but one of the things we lack is understanding of minimum effective dosing. And I've recognized a couple of times that we in Jamaica have this tendency where we want to get the kids better. And a lot of time, what I've noticed, more inexperienced coaches, they want to show that they are the best coach and they can put on the most load and all this good stuff. But when you guys are talking about loading, I completely understand that you were talking within the confines of minimum effective dosing. But at the same time, I understand that most people don't have a gauge as to what minimum effective dosing is. Minimum effective dosing is what is the least I can do to an athlete to elicit a response without causing any damage over the next couple of months, years, whatever it is. I, for one, whenever I'm training my athletes, I go on a 10-day cycle, and this 10-day cycle is based on their healing cycle. And that healing cycle, I oftentimes gather that from if they get a cut and to see how long that cut would heal, or if they get a cold and how long that would heal. And then if they're not able to recover within that 10 days, it's a high possibility that I am not doing the minimum effective dosing for their performance enhancement. And I do understand what you were talking about, Mr. Gale, with regards to the muscles, the tendons, and the bones, and their different level of stress capacity. And when we talk about overload, we're talking about overloading, as you said, the entire system. And a lot of coaches on here, we actually, I'm gonna put myself in it because I've made that mistake on numerous occasions. We sometimes look at what a previous athlete was able to do, and then we kind of extrapolate to say, you know what, if the brother is bigger and stronger than the one, then I can go through with more. Because we sometimes practice a thing where more is better, as opposed to what works yesterday might not work today.
True.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I agree with what you're saying. Well, because the management was the topic was load management, I may have leaned towards more educating on overload, because I would have thought that most persons wouldn't be sure how to gauge overload. But minimum effective dosing is also a great way to understand and to approach it, because if you are staying at minimum and you're getting the results, why work harder? If you're getting the results, why force the athlete to work harder? Why not just continue to build with that minimum, elicit the response, and once the response is elicited, the person will continue to get better. But most persons think that more is better, and hence the education on staying away from overloading.
All right. Hi, afternoon. Hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Oh, sorry. Oh, my bad. David, go ahead. I did see your hand up before mine. Go ahead, David Hanson.
All right, thank you very much. Just a few comments. To explain the whole concept of overload, I would use that which is used by the psychiatrist, psychologist, meaning that stress is good. All of us live with stress every day, and it's part of what drives us. However, when stress outstrips our resources to cope with a challenge, it becomes a negative stress. In other words, it produces negative consequences. Similarly, when we talk about physical development, if we are physically unable to meet the demands of the stress that we are asked to bear by a coach, then injury will result. So the factors that are involved are rapid increase in intensity, rapid increase in duration, rapid increase in frequency. And I've heard that said in the session, but there are other things that I haven't heard said. For example, for joggers, for runners, a change of footwear can cause an injury, right? Sorry. And for example, in football, sometimes you'll have players exchanging boots, taking each other's boots to play in, and they don't realize that that is an increased risk for injury. The other thing I would like to mention is that in certain jurisdictions, the government actually gets involved in placing a limit on how much load can be applied to youngsters who are in training. For example, if you look at the UK, where they have a number of football academies, there are very strict guidelines as to how many training sessions they can have for the week, as to how many competitive games children of a certain age can play for the week. So my personal opinion is that at some point, based on what we as sports medicine practitioners have seen, the government, I think, is going to have to get involved in regulating some of what goes on in our schools as training. And finally, one thing I haven't heard mentioned is the fact that when youngsters are going through a growth spurt, they're at greater risk of injury than when they're not. For example, coming back from summer holidays, you may see a boy that left at 5'8", return at 6 foot. Can you train that guy who is in a growth spurt the same as you would when he wasn't? And so coaches need to be aware of things like that and make adjustments specific to the individual, because not all of them will be going through a growth spurt at the same time. That's my contribution. Thanks.
Yes, that answer. Thank you. I think I want to take two more questions at most. Coach Alvaranga and then Dr. Palmer. Coach, go right ahead.
All right, thanks. It's not well. I guess the question I'd asked was, how do you know overtraining? I believe the first speaker, Mr. Gale, said he would take it up. He literally covers it, and I'd like to acknowledge a couple of you here. Richard is so modest with his introduction. Richard, I'm a student of yours, student of Olivia Rose, Dr. Brown, just to name a few. And how much is enough to get the right stimulus for an athlete to perform at an upcoming competition? For swimming, and Mr. Gale, boy, Mr. Grisham will be pleased. Grisham is in Grenada to hear you mention swimming a few times in your presentation. More than basketball, we have overhead repetition, and our main injury is shoulder, while we have others. So this is where the overloading may come in real. We're not adapted for swimming. Does your 10% rule apply for track and field or for all sports in the increase? Because we have different athletes coming in at different times of our training phase, and having to deal with parent of Diallo. When Diallo came in 4 inches taller without his quadriceps growing as fast as his bone, how do we address those kind of things?
I wish that happened.
Well, all right. So when addressing those differences, for example, as you would say for swimming, the athlete comes in a little taller, and you're thinking, do I increase their training volume as planned, or do I start from grassroots? As a physiotherapist, I would go retrain that coordination, give him a few more coordination drills, let him adjust to utilizing his new height, getting accustomed to his body frame. Then from there, land-based strengthening to get the things to catch up, and then progressing laps in the pool, right? So I would go coordination, strengthening, then 10% rule. For someone, if when the parent comes in and they're like, he was doing this before, and now you have him on here just catching ball or something, then I would have to educate that parent. And if that is too much, I would say ask for either a neutral party or someone in the field to explain the rationale behind what you're doing, because they might just see as a coach and say, oh, coach not like my athlete or my student. That is why that is being done. So I would say gather support to explain it to the parent, so that if that's a factor, you have that covered. And then once the coordination and so forth catches up, then you progress. And surprisingly enough, with cross training, as the return to sport was saying, is that with cross training, things transfer over. So for example, if they learn coordination in another sport, while building up their endurance, they will maintain their endurance, and then when they come back to swimming, they may be able to fit into that 10% progression, right? But if the coordination is not there and the muscular strength is not there, then the 10% rule shouldn't be applied to them, because they are at risk for increased injury due to poor coordination or muscle weaknesses / imbalances.
Thank you.
All right, time for only one more question at best. Dr. Palmer.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for the good presentation. I will try to be as brief as possible. I noticed in your ratio of chronic load to acute load, or acute load to chronic load, that you use 7 to 28 days. I wanted to know if your slide said some if it is the sum of the activity, that's hours or duration, or it is the average over 7 days of both chronic and acute we're looking at. The reason I ask is because if you're using 28 days and you use the sum of all the duration of your activity over 28 days and put that as a ratio to those over 7 days, the difference may always be significant. But if you're adding the 28 days and then dividing that by 4, so now you get a 7-day average and use that as a ratio, that may give you a more precise idea. So I was wondering if I misunderstood what you were saying. So that's one question. I know I'm involved in cycling. I know in cycling, we actually have software that can work this out for you. And we actually use 42 days, that's 6 weeks as our chronic load, and then 7 days as our acute load. And then look at that as a ratio. And then whether it's negative or positive, that can give you an idea. And it's important to load and be in the negative. In fact, a lot of our training takes place in the negative. What we then do is taper the athlete coming towards an event and then bring them to a positive in their ratio. And then we have an idea of what sort of positive ratio we want. Somewhere between plus 15 and plus 25 means that our athlete is optimal for training. The second thing is RPE, or perceived exertion. How does that tell you about your athlete being overloaded? I think it is very critical. And there are some important things we can learn from perceived exertion of the athlete based on what you expect and anticipate. They may be able to complete the session, but it seems way harder than it did yesterday. And that may tell you about the load that you have. Thank you.
Right. So as it relates to your first question, because it was a running example, it would have just been miles compared to, because you wouldn't necessarily average a mile, because if you're running once per day, averaging the mile wouldn't make any sense, because if you ran 6 miles yesterday and a total of, however, it would just be exactly miles. If it was a case that is another sport and we're using time or average time, based on that, then the average would be more feasible and give a better picture. But in running, because most times the calculation only looks at how much miles you're running, it doesn't do an average of the day. It's a sum of how many you've done over the past four weeks. As it relates
I'm not
to
a running
cycling,
coach, but that's not really how most programs are set up. It's not an increased volume by day. You may do 30 miles for the week, but you may be doing 10 today and 2 tomorrow, depending on what it is that you are trying to do with each specific session. That's why I'm asking.
I understand that. Previously, my understanding of running long distance, I'm not good with the short distance planning and training, but understanding of the long distance calculation, it normally doesn't average out the day by day planning. It would just give you, this is the expected for the week. So yes, you would have a 10-day run, a 2-mile recovery run, and so forth. But it would just sum that up and say that this is your miles run for this week compared to the previous 4 weeks, right? And that was the understanding of the formula that I was working with, right? For different sports, yes, the average would make sense, because if you're factoring overall training volume for different sports, say it's for example swimming, you're doing however many laps. So you say this week you're planning to do X lap at this time. You want to average the time for this training block of laps to see how it compares to the previous time to see if you're getting faster, better, and so forth. And then as it relates to RPE, yes, RPE is very important. Because I overlooked it in the beginning, I was mentioning it where to say quantifying load where the person would have run their best time but feel exhausted and not happy with it because overall their body is such overload. The RPE at that example would be a 10 because yes, it's their best time, but they just felt like they have maxed out. Whereas at another time in their training cycle, they may have run that time and it felt easy. And that would coincide with a different RPE, right? So overall, that allows subjective assessment, well, somewhat subjective / objective, because it's subjective to the person, but each person's opinion is subjective of their exertion. And you can't say, oh, that does not line up with whatever. So it's subjective, yes, but it gives you an idea of what the athlete is feeling, how it felt compared to what you anticipated, because in your planning, you may have thought that 200 meter at 18 seconds would, well, that's like 200 meter at 23 seconds would be comfortable for someone who has previously ran 20 seconds. But if that RPE is not matching up with what you're thinking, then that cues you in that something external may be affecting their performance that is not empirical on your training planning. So yes, RPE.
Romario, sorry. Yeah,
Sorry.
we have to cut the question. But thank you very much for that explanation. I'm bringing the RPE as well. Sorry to cut you. If we have time at the end, we're going to take more questions at the end of our presentations, if there's time. But I thank you again, Mr. Gale. Thank you very much. All right. So at this time, we're going to go on to the next presentation. Mr. Thomas, you want to do the introduction, or is that Mrs. McIntosh? All right.
All right. I'd like to thank Secretary again. All right. So we know the whole idea just says where the mind goes, the body follows. So our next presenter is an expert at mental skill training. His name is Dr. Jason Hamilton. He has many accolades, and we are short of time, so I'm going to name a few. He's a licensed clinical sports psychologist, president and CEO of Elite Sports Psychology. He has, I believe, over 30 years of experience and academia and clinical sports psychology. He's a founding associate director of the Ronald E. McNair Post-Baccalaureate program at FIU. He's also a former athlete, and I mean, who else but somebody who has the experience himself to guide the adolescents in terms of how to manage the mental aspect of loading. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Jason Hamilton and ask him to commence his presentation. Doc?
All right, thank you very much. Glad to be here again. Diallo, you guys going to help me with the slides. So if we can just go to the first slide.
Yeah, man, no problem. Let me just bring it up. I'll show my screen.
Yeah, let me see your screen. And not Diallo, you have your first screen. Hello?
Look like Diallo wants some help.
Yeah,
sorry, no, I was on mute. Coming up.
The last slide, second to last.
Right. Let me just get to the start.
Let's go to slides. Yeah, there you go. All right, that's the first one. All right. Good evening, everyone. I just got back from Jamaica, so I'm back in my office here in Miami, and I've really liked the presentation so far. For the purposes of this presentation and addressing the mental aspects of load management, overload, it has resulted in what we in clinical psychology and sports psychology refer to as burnout of the athlete. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to be addressing burnout. If you can go to the next slide. Diallo? Okay.
Are you seeing that? Okay, there we go.
Athlete load management, and we deal with burnout. All right, next one. I'll go back. Yeah. So what is burnout? The state of physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. Burnout is a response to chronic stress of continued demands, a sport activity without the opportunity for physical and mental rest and recovery. Burnout is a syndrome of continuous training and sports-related stress, resulting in staleness, overtraining, and eventually burning out. Burnout is usually a product of overtraining, which leads to, again, as I said, staleness, a significant performance decrement that has persisted for at least 2 weeks. So you see the athletes is just train and train, and the time is getting worse. Socially, they are irritable. They look fatigued. So burnout, if left unattended in some athletes, can cause athletes to quit their sport. And over the 25 years that I've been doing this, Jamaica is very good at producing great athletes. But I don't think that would take as much care with an athlete who's experienced burnout and could have been a great athlete and just didn't have what we used to call, or what we still call, grit. Just coming back from Tokyo and the Commonwealth Games. Just a quick example, we have she just got the gold medal in the triple jump, Shanika Ricketts and her husband, Coach Kerry. They could spend a lot of time complaining and worrying and frustrated with minutiae things and even experience burnout. But she don't get into the whole heap of complaining and everything. She just keep her eyes on the goal and keep working hard. That is because of mental strength development training, and she's very good, as well as her husband. Next slide. Kerry. Next slide, Diala. Thank you. Okay. Factors causing burnout, according to Gold et al. Physical injury, overtraining, lack of physical development, erratic performance, feeling tired all the time, logistical travel grind, time performance, little time for anything else. All they're doing is training. Social and interpersonal dissatisfaction with social life, negative parental team coach influences, dissatisfaction with sporting world, cheating by competitors. Next slide. Okay, situational issues, coach relationship, low social support, high competitive demand, time and energy demands, insufficient skills, boredom, regimentation, and lack of autonomy. Psychologically, 50% of the reasons given for burnout, unfulfilled or inappropriate expectations. So you have the prefrontal cortex, which controls executive functioning. And when you see an athlete trying to do something that they've never trained to do, that's a subconscious, that's a conscious brain. The subconscious is what part of your brain does the performance, which is why through engraving and visualization, we can get the athlete to see themselves. But when you see an athlete trying to do something that they've never trained to do, then you know that the limbic cortical region and the region of the brain that causes problems is affecting that athlete. So psychologically, again, 50% of the reasons given for burnout, unfulfilled or inappropriate expectation. You were expecting to run 9.58 in the 100, and you've never run under 11 yet. That's inappropriate expectation. Overemphasis on rankings, realization that a professional career was unlikely. I just finished presenting, and the last slide you'll see it, at about 8 schools in Jamaica. Tivoli, Arnett, Charlie Smith, Woolmers, Georges, JC, Calabar, Casey, Glenmuir, and primarily I spoke to the Manning Cup players and the netball girls because they were very structured teams and they're doing this for the United Nations Young Women Program addressing violence against young women. And when I asked of all the Manning Cup and netball players, how many of them expected to make a living in their sport, it was 100% of them believe that they're going to make a living from their sport. Now, realistically, that can happen, but it's not my position to tell a youth what they can and cannot do. If they're prepared and can do the work and don't get burned out and keep enjoying it, even though training is hard. There was a race back when Shelley and Fraser Price ran 100 meter in high school, and Shelley came either third or fourth. The girls who came first, second, and third, we never hear about them again. And the whole entire world knows about Shelley and Fraser Price. So again, 50% of the reason given for burnout, unfulfilled, or inappropriate expectations. Overemphasis on ranking, realization that a professional career was unlikely, lack of enjoyment, coach and parental pressure. So you have parents who've never, as in coach, I'll give you an example, but there are parents who've never participated in a sport, but because their child is very good, they are living vicariously through their child, and it creates a strange dynamic with the coach and the parent. So lack of enjoyment, coach and parental pressure, self-pressure. Motivational concerns include wanting to try other sport and non-sport activities, simply being sick of playing the same sport. Research shows that stages of development is important. What a child does between 0 and 5 is different from what they do between 5 and 10, is different from what they do between 15 and 20. And if you can expose a child to many sports between 5 and 10, and then you see them latch on or like a particular sport, and you say to them, this is the one you want to do, and they are like, yeah, then you can work that way. But for you to be latching on and locking in at, 3, 4 years old and say, this is the only sport you're going to play, that will cause concern to me, a clinical psychologist and sports psychologist, and to others in our field. Next slide. Next slide, yeah, thank you. Frequency of overtraining and staleness. 66% of college athletes experience some overtraining about twice a year on average. 72% of athletes have reported some staleness in their performance in sports season. 60 to 64% of runners have experienced some staleness once a year. 30% of sub-elite runners report staleness. Now, if you look at great athletes like Dr. Usain Leo Bolt, Rafa Nadal, they went through difficulty, Remember when I was young, Usain, who started in the 400, I come to Coach Mills and say, if I beat these guys in the 100 and the 200, I can't stay in there. Yep, he did it. Rest is history. But don't give Usain nothing for do at nighttime. Everything you want to see him do, he's going to do it at the track in front of Coach Mills. Same with Rafa. Rafa is OCD. Rafa is a very scared youth. If you read his book, I've read every book they write about him. Rafa is really like a scaredy cat, even though he's a warrior. He's the GOAT, the greatest of all tennis players ever with the most Grand Slams. He likes and wishes to have a a big boat when he retires, but he's scared of the water and really want to go in the shallow end. Why you see Rafa being OCD about placing his water bottle the same place and don't really care if the whole world is laughing at him picking out his butt when he serves? He is in control of himself on the tennis court. Nowhere else in Rafa's life is he as in control. And even then, it's not easy, right? The Djokovic and Federer and even the little youngster, others are coming up, you know? He's up in age. All right, next slide. So this is a very important area. Cognitive affective stress model by Smith, and this is way back in 1986. So personal and motivational factors. So there's stress to the athlete. In stage one, there's situation, demands, and resources, right? So you have the stress, what causes burnout, high or conflicting demands, overload, low social support. So that would be stage one. In stage two, in the stress area, there's cognitive appraisal, which is of the demands of resources and consequences. So if the athlete is young and their prefrontal cortex is still developing, Coach Rory spoke about it earlier in his question, Alvaranga, where he said the male athlete can still compete at 18 while the female has to stop at 17. That's because the female's prefrontal cortex is fully developed at 21 and the male is fully developed at 25. So if you're young and you're not aware of what's going on, the problems that you present to a 10 or a 15-year-old child, give that same problem to that child at 35 or that person at 35, and the problem at 35 is not a big deal. But the problem at 15 is a big deal. Hence, you have suicide in young people because they think the problem is too big. I can't solve this problem. You know, best thing for me to do is to not be here anymore, which is not the right answer. All right, stage two, cognitive appraisal, which would cause burnout, perceived overload, perceived lack of control, helplessness. When the athlete is in that stage, the coaches, the physiotherapists, the medical doctors need to be aware and see the signs, you know, and it's called psychological first aid. You don't have to be a licensed clinical psychologist to be a caring human being. You can pick up on the fact that this young person seems out of sorts, right? Because when that limbic cortical region is saying to them every morning as they wake up, hey, good morning, you know what is the best thing you should do today? You should just jump off a building. That's not a good thing. And them can't jump off the building and then halfway coming down passing the 13th floor, them decide, say, you know what is true, I don't really want to kill myself anymore. That done, you're about to hit the concrete, right? I know I don't want to get into too remorse of a subject, but when you're dealing with the mental health of an athlete, I'm pushing with the JOA and the Sports Medical Association for us to be doing training in what is called psychological first aid, so that many, even if you're a physiotherapist or you're whatever in the Sports Medical Association, you can look for telltale signs that this young person is in a mentally stressful situation. So stage three, physical responses, arousal activation. What causes burnout? Physical responses, tension and anger, anxiety, depression, fatigue, insomnia. You trying to curse out a coach, kicking over the water bottle. So I'm not playing no more, I'm done. You know, and they get into a series of complaining. The reason why coach don't pick me is because coach don't know what I'm doing, and I really is one of the best players on the team. And if coach just put me into the game, we'd win this thing. As I said earlier in my first example with Shanika Ricketts, that lady could easily complain she could easily complain for like 17 years and have enough to complain for 17 years. But she's not a complainer. She know life is difficult. She know is a small percentage of people going to get to the top of her sport. Herself and her husband are amazing. I remember Kerry saying to me in Tokyo, Doc, it's my fault why Shanika never medal in Tokyo because I should have made the adjustments for her run-up. So I'm very proud of the both of them. And I'm just using them as an example. All right, so stage 4, coping behavior, coping efforts, response behaviors. What causes or what is a telltale sign of burnout? Decreased performance. All of you know, you just seen it. Your athlete they're not with it anymore. They don't want it. Withdrawal, interpersonal difficulties, inappropriate behavior. The previous presenter spoke about time on social media. I had 2 athletes, actually 3 athletes. One father died. They actually committed suicide, but the father passed away. So the mother is raising the athlete, and the athlete is doing well. Doing very well in his physical training, doing very well. But he's hurting too, losing father. I have 2 other athletes. They live with their father and their mother, and they were doing really well. But because we're able to check on either the iPhone or the Android to see how much time they're spending on TikTok and Snapchat and social media, we realize that I'm spending like 7 hours. So when they came here initially, they were very good football players. All 3 of them play football. And the one who lost his father, I started working with him after the first 2. The one who I started working after who lost his father is mentally strong, is doing very well. He's a phenomenal athlete. And probability is high that he's going to go very far. The other 2, the elder brother, not doing as well. And so we came up with a behavior contract. So they're on burner phones now. They get one hour of social media per day. They can break it up, or they can do it at the end of the day, and they go on and so that they can text them friends and see. So they're still like part of the young people human race. So since they've been reduced to 1 hour of social media and they started enjoying themselves again. The younger brother is doing better than the older brother, but he's really enjoying it. Pushing himself, 200 push-ups, 200 Russian twists, 200 crunches, doing him 400-meter run, 200-meter run, putting in the 2 mile. He's doing it. And they're now looking like the young man who lost his father. So that's just an example. You definitely do, like the presenter before, have to monitor that social media, because the social media thing is affecting their mind. Next slide. Next slide, Diallo. Oh, thank you. Okay, so the student athlete has to prioritize time and train and eat and still get their schoolwork done. This is according to ex-Major League pitcher Bob Tewksbury, a sports psychologist. They've been specializing since they were 10, and now they're 17, and they don't want to do it anymore. The pressure of being a student athlete are immense. They don't start in college, they start in high school when they're trying to get in college. Sports, and I tell athletes this all the time, sports in its essence is fun. So you can, if you can be having fun, even though you're putting in hard work. Anytime I see Shelly Ann, I write about it all the time, and then Shelly Ann tell me, thank you, Dr. Hamilton, for being part of the sports medical team. Anytime you see Shelly Ann smiling before the race is finished. Her body is going to be releasing serotonin and norepinephrine. She's still enjoying it as mommy rocket, right? Sports are fun. Sports are competitive. Sports can be stressful. The stress can motivate you, right? To see how much you can do, or it can demoralize you. Student athletes, sometimes it happens, both happens. There was a NCAA athlete named Kyle Dake. Once he understood from his sports psychologist that anxiety and fear and worry are not real, the sports psychologist told him to pick up his phone. He picked it up. He said, put the phone down. Put the phone down. He said, no, pick up some fear. Can't pick it up. Pick up some anxiety. Can't pick it up. Pick up some worry. Can't pick it up. He says, you create those things. Fear, anxiety, worry. So the same way you can create them, you can just nobody create none. Okay? Then he went on to dominate the NCAA 4 years in a row, winning every year. But the amazing thing is he went up in weight category. So that would be equivalent of Bolt winning class 1 champs in class 3. Then the next year, him win at the Olympics. Then the next year, world championships. Then the next year, set a world record. That's what Kyle Blake did. Okay, next slide. The sporting world is more aware of mental health. The sporting world is more aware of mental health now than ever before. Gone are the days dominated by you need to tough it out culture. Gymnast Simone Biles, who I saw in Tokyo, struggled at last year's Olympics, as well as Naomi Osaka, which we also saw there because at the opening, has spoken openly about her mental health. So have swimmer Michael Phelps, NBA star Kevin Love, and DeMar DeRozan. Former college football player Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson also spoke up about the mental strength or the mental aspect of sport. At least 4 student athletes, and this is important to know based on the point I just made before, at least 4 student athletes have committed suicide in 2022, the year we are in right now, according to CBS Sport. Mental health awareness and making resources available to student athletes are on the minds of coaches, players, and administration. According to the New Hampshire, according to the New Hampshire Interscholastic Athletic Association, about 38,000 students took part in high school sports in the state last year. U.S. Department of Education statistics say about 4,600 athletes compete in the Granite State colleges and universities. Next slide. The cost of burnout. Athletes, particular female athletes, often retire from their sport during their mid-teens, long before they have reached their physical and psychological prime. The losses created by this early attrition rate are great in terms of unfulfilled human potential and lower quality of our national team programs. I just got back from the US Open where I watched Venus and Serena and Rafa Nadal. And Serena said something that was very important. She's the youngest of Richard Williams' girls. And her daughter wants a sister, which is why she has moved on from tennis and is just focusing on her family. But she said, Rafa and Federer and all those male great tennis players don't have to concede with what she has to concede with. Yeah, them can't have babies, you know. She wanted to break Margaret Court's record. I believe she still could, but it's unfair. One of the other things while I'm talking about women, I've noticed this. If a female athlete believes in you as a clinical psychologist and a sports psychologist helping her, and that you could help her become great, if she believes in it, she can handle all that comes so she doesn't get burnt out. She knows it's going to be difficult. The women in Jamaica and the women that I'm working with can work harder. According to me and my doctoral students, we've found this. They can work harder than some men if they buy in and believe that the mental exercises you're giving them every day will help them to achieve their goals. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, sorry. No, go back. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go back. Okay, Jennifer Capriat. Next slide, Diallo. Sorry. Diallo. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so example, a case study was Jennifer Capriati. She turned pro at nearly 14. She reached the semifinals of the French Open and Wimbledon. She was ranked 8th in the world, becoming the youngest player ever to rank in the top 10. She got 6 million in endorsements and sponsorship. In 1992, she won an Olympic gold at the age of 16, youngest ever Olympic champion. She beat Steffi Graf that year. In 1993, 3 years into turning pro, she dropped out from the tour. She lost in the first round. So she's only 16 going on to 17, and she's finished. Lost in the first round, US Open, to the 37th ranked player, Leila Meski. In December of 1993, she was caught for shoplifting. In 1994, she was arrested for possession of marijuana, and she was put in a drug rehab. She dropped out of the tour again. In 1996, she joined the tour, but struggled to regain her previous success. She was overweight and out of shape, ranking 50th. Here's what Jennifer Capri had to say in 2001. Maybe 14 is too young to handle everything emotionally. Sorry, time in this thing. Okay, 25. Yeah, maybe 14 is too young to handle everything emotionally. And I need to escape from the expectation of being able to win every tournament I entered. I was always expected to be the top. And if I didn't win, to me, that meant I was a loser. If I played terrible, I thought I could handle it, but I really couldn't. I felt no one liked me as a person. I was depressed, sad, lonely, and guilty. Was burned out. Burned out. That's the overload, load money. After the US Open, I spent a week in bed. This is depression, in darkness, just hating everything. When I looked in the mirror, I saw this distorted image. So she wasn't seeing what everybody else was seeing. I just wanted to kill myself. I'm not addicted to drugs, but you could say I was addicted to my own pain. Jennifer Capriati, 2001. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So anxiety, depression, and worsen for student athletes. Lauren Moran, the strain of competing at a high level while balancing studies and personal relationship can overwhelm young people. It did just that to Lauren, a senior softball player at Anaheim College. A self-described perfectionist, Moran said she put a lot of pressure on herself to succeed on the field and in the classroom. It took a toll on her in high school. the toll on her in high school. I started to deal with really bad anxiety, said Moran. From the anxiety was so bad, I became depressed. The strain continued in college, and the isolation of the COVID-19 pandemic was the breaking point. I did try to take my own life. I'm glad that didn't work out. Moran was admitted to an inpatient mental health hospital. Drive to excel. The pressure can be too much. We do see in the literature and research about the pressures that we put on young people, that early on, the pressure to figure it out, choose your path. We're asking a 16-year-old, what do you want to do with your entire life? That's a lot. Go study that. Societally, we have put on young people that drive to excel. Hyper specializing is just one sport at an early age, as I said earlier, can deprive a young person of a critical growth opportunity. Susan Stearns is the executive director of the National Alliance of Mental Health in New Hampshire. Next slide.
Excuse me, Jason. Well, can you give about 5 more minutes?
Yeah, I got it. I'm almost wrapping it. 5 minutes is good. Yeah, I'm trying to myself on the other side. Okay, colleges and universities have responded to the increased awareness of mental health issues among student athletes by forging strong links between athletic departments, campus mental health counseling resources. Dartmouth created the Dartmouth Peak Performance Program in 2011 with sports psychologist Hyatt, and said it involves sports, medicine, athletic training, strength and conditioning, nutrition, leadership, and mental performances, as well as academic support. Students created their own resources at Dartmouth. I has a chapter of Morgan's Message, a program started at Duke University that emphasized the mental health of student athletes. Dartmouth students founded a group called the Hidden Opponent. Next slide. Next slide. Injury, fear of injury, as the previous two presented. In sports psychology, we call it performing like your glass. So you broke your leg or you dislocated your shoulder and you never quite perform the same way again because you're anticipating re-injuring yourself or breaking your leg again. When in truth and in fact, sometimes that injury has caused that part of your body to be stronger. Fear of injury is another source of anxiety for student athletes. Athletes want to play and are concerned about losing their place in the team. Another challenge is helping students adapt to the end of their athletic careers, which for most coincide with the end of college. Counselors work with students to ask, how else do I start to define myself outside of my sport? There's a lot of stress around the injury and recovering process. Some injuries, there's a set recovery process, and some can be very uncertain, particularly concussions. For college students and high school students, if you're concussed, you rest your brain and they're working, they're studying, they're in front of screens, as was stated in the previous presenter, which can prolong the process. Mark Hyatt, sports psychology director at Dartmouth. Next slide. Seeking a healthy balance. Dartmouth coaches want to become more involved in supporting student mental health, and the school is eager to help the coaches. This year is offering a mental health first aid program, like I spoke a while ago about psychological first aid. Coaches deal with their own pressures. Coaches, we don't expect coaches to be therapists, though sometimes it can feel like that in that the role, but they have the confidence of their athlete. They get to know the athletes very well. This is why I'm emphasizing that psychological first aid. If they're starting to see signs that their students are struggling or withdrawn, they can respond and be supported and help the student get directed to the appropriate resources. Athletes who are in training can be better rested and enjoy all of the positive results from following a schedule, eating a more healthy diet, reducing stress. However, burnout is a danger if an athlete goes down the rabbit hole of prioritizing sport at the expense of balance in their lives. Next slide. Aha, the legend. Final slide. Okay, treating and preventing burnout. Set short-term goals for competition and practice. Allow athletes to communicate their feelings to others. Allow timeout breaks. Teach self-regulation skills, example, relaxation, imagery, goal setting, self-talk. Reinforce positive outlooks. Manage post-competition emotions and maintain good physical condition. Dr. Usain St. Leopold, Michael Jordan, and Shaquille O'Neal all agreed with me that the mental aspect and the mental strength development for an athlete is paramount to elite performance. Here are my references. Next slide. Oh, okay. So those are some. No. Yeah, go to that next slide. So that's it. That first picture at the top, that was me speaking on Sports Max. That second picture is the project we're doing with the United Nations Young Women Program against violence against young women. That was Shelly Ann at the Commonwealth Games. Kobe, Jellyfish, Georges, Charlie Smith, greatest football player ever to play for Jamaica, who is part of our program, Alan Cherry Skillcole. Yeah, so those are some of the programs that we're doing right now. Next slide is my references, acknowledgements. And if anybody has any questions, I'll take the questions now. That's it. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you very much for that very informative presentation. I decided to go ahead with the first question. And it's in the last slide with information on it. We're talking about treatment, and you said manage post-competition emotions. Could you just speak a little bit more on that? And in terms of, because I want to know if this is something where we would need somebody like yourself as a professional to intervene, or is it something that you can educate us who aren't trained in that aspect to manage?
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to get, and the Sports Association of Jamaica Sports Association of Association of Sports Medical. You guys have been very good at realizing the importance. So each time I've come and worked in the country of my birth, come back home to Jamaica, just in the parish of Miami till my youth them finish up this college thing, and then back in OCR. The point is, yes, I can train people, and there are other colleagues in psychiatry and the clinical in Jamaica that can train us in psychological first aid. It's just things that you could look out for to just as a caring human being, and their telltale signs. I'll give you a quick telltale sign. You say an athlete start to give away things they like them just get an iPhone 13 and them giving it away. Just get a wicked pair of spikes, them giving it away. Them get a nice laptop, they're giving it away.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good. That person is preparing to leave the earth before it's time for them to leave the earth, right? So there are things that we can be trained on. You don't have to necessarily be a licensed clinical psychologist to be a caring human being. So yeah, we can. I would love to be able to come and do seminars and train people in psychological first aid.
Okay, excellent. So, so some of the things you would probably enlighten us, as I said, it's a telltale signs, and
Yes.
And how to identify them, and then how to address it once we've seen them.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm opening the floor. I'm going to look at the chat. Anybody has any question?
But Mr.
Anybody?
Thomas, I just made the point to Dr. Hamilton. We might take you up on that. Want you to come down to seminars? We might take you up on that.
You know what? Just tell me, hey, Doc, we need you in Jamaica. I just find myself back in Jamaica.
Right. But are there certifications for that, or is there a certification for that? Is there a psychological
That's
first
what
aid?
I'm trying to do. I am trying. So I'm also a board member of the Jamaica Psychiatric and Psychological Association. And we're looking at ways that we can do certification of so okay, because right now the Olympics has a program where you can get certified.
Right. You mean through the IOC?
Yes, through the IOC. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that would be good. That would be good. Sorry, I see Mr. Miller had a question, and Coach Alvarenga.
Piran. I'm not a member of. Yeah, I'm doing that program right now with Piran.
Oh, nice, excellent. All right. Mr. Miller.
I've got just a question, right? Because Leon Taylor here.
Oh, yes, Mr.
Under the Coaching Association of Canada, which I came up under also, they've incorporated that aspect of in the coaching program. So as you are training as a coach, whether it be whatever sport, right? There's a general course that you do in sports psychology, right? And it's very basic, but it helps you to motivate your athletes and that sort of thing. I'm looking at probably sporting bodies in Jamaica would want to incorporate that aspect in their coaching program. I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that would be.
I would agree with you. We've been doing it more, and the thing is, I think more people would be interested in the subject if you understand how to manage the mind, right? There's a region of the brain that I've spent my entire academic career studying. It's called the limbic cortical region. The stupidness and foolishness we do in life is that region of the brain. And if you can manage that region of the brain, then you can do amazing things and not the stupid things. My father, who is a big part of the reason why I love to do things to help schools and children, he was the first public defender of Jamaica, and he was a good attorney, Queen's Counsel. He passed away last year before the Queen passed away. So as a JC man, he wouldn't like have KC after him name. But to go back to your point about the training, the understanding of the brain, coaches would be interested in the sports psychology course like you just spoke about that's in Canada, or the certification program that I just spoke about with the IOC. Because once you understand how your athlete thinks, then you can help your athlete not do nonsense. I'll give you an example. Like I said earlier, the male brain prefrontal cortex is developed at 25, the female at 21. Women and females sometimes do much more mature things than us and do less stupid things. I asked this example at every school I went to, and some of them were all boys school. I said, raise your hand if you've ever walked by a policeman and you saw his gun and you thought, I could take that gun off that man. Many males have had that thought. It's a stupid thought because that's a limbic cortical region. Because all the limbic cortical region does is do suggestions to you, right? You ask a room full of women if they ever have that, and most of the women will say, I never thought of that stupidness, right? Because it's stupid. If you grab the gun and the police is able to grab it back from you, you can't say, sorry, officer, I never mean to do that. That was my limbic cortical region. First of all, him don't know what you're talking about. Next minute, they're going to shot you or take the gun and beat you up. That was your part of your brain that does stupid things, suggests a stupid thing to do, right? That part of your brain likes alcohol and drugs, which then makes it less likely for the prefrontal cortex to stop you from doing foolishness. So to go back to long-winded way of answering that question, yes, I think people would be interested in that program that you were talking about from Canada, and also just getting certified in sports psychology so they have a better understanding of what's going on in their athlete's mind, and they're not just working at the physical level, but they also understand the emotional and the mental makeup of their athlete.
One more question. Mr. Alvarenga.
Greetings, Fervet.
Yes, JC, man, I hear you, Rory.
Yeah, just last week I had one of my swimmers say to me, whisper to me on the side, coach, from January, I'm not feeling it again. He just returned from World Juniors. Another one of them, you just mentioned it. He came back. A lot of people don't know that one swim trunks, that little thing that the men pull on, cost $375 US. He started selling them out. How do I talk to? I will refer them to you, Dr. Olivia Rose. Big up yourself. I embrace the whole sports medicine, but everything that was discussed here today, I have experienced because I have from age 6 to age 18. How do I reach out to that kid and that parent who is selling his $375 US jammers and his $200 goggles and say, hey guy, it's not that bad?
Okay. Yeah, let's also big up Dr. Olivia Rose. I would, because Dr. Rose is right there in Jamaica right now. I would refer that young man and their parents to Dr. Olivia Rose or to Dr. Kai Morgan. Dr. Kai Morgan is a licensed clinical psychologist, but Dr. Olivia Rose is a sports psychologist. I would refer to either of the two. And Dr. Rose is familiar with the tripartite conversation. So the athlete would be talking to Dr. Rose. The parent would then be talking to the Dr. Rose. When the athlete is talking to Dr. Rose, the parent is hearing what she's saying. When the parent is talking to Dr. Rose, the athlete and Dr. Rose are here. And it's a tripartite conversation, and a lot can be gleaned from that conversation. And inquire as to why the athlete is selling their swimwear or their swim equipment. Are they ready to quit? And if it's the beginning of the season, you're addressing issues like, all right, well, let's just see the season through. And if you really want to, you no longer want to do this, we can discuss it. But you're committed to, we signed up, we paid for this thing. So let's at least, because how you're feeling today might be different from how you're feeling at the end of the season. But with regard to you picking up on psychological cues as to that this athlete seeming like they're burning out, or they're not wanting to do this, or even worse, they're depressed, please refer to Dr. Olivia Rose and or Dr. Kai Morgan.
All right, Doc. Yes, I've done that. Unknown to many, despite what we have done in track and field. Swimming, if you check it out, is the second most difficult sport, second only to gymnastics. So the workload does get hard. And the higher the monkey climber, the more him exposed. That's how it go?
True.
Workload gets harder, and when they are asked to go outside of their comfort zone and the result is not there immediate, the immediate gratification, the one pill, the one visit with Dr. Hamilton, the one visit with Dr. Rose is just not going to cut it. can you then, outside of IOC, bring something like this to the JOA where coaches get a better understanding of the full sports medicine package?
Well, I'm in a group with Dr. Rose. I'm going to try and see how we can go about implementing this. Piran has recommended a great program. And when I was at Tokyo, there was a very good, the French team traveled with like 7 sports psychologists. There was a good psychological first aid program that the French team had. So I will look into it and I will get with Dr. Rose and others and see how we can go about, getting this to President Samuda to see if we can offer a psychological first aid certificate program. Because it's important to know. You can't, you know your athlete, or you think you know your athlete. That's a bad thing. You think you know the athlete, you know the pain, but some athletes start to feign pain because they're at the beginning stage of burnout. You understand? And you're like, I don't really know.
Excuse me, Dr. Hamilton. Sorry, we have to take one more from
YouTube.
And we really have run over time. So
okay.
Could you just allow one more from the YouTube?
Yes.
Whatever, from the other.
Oh, okay. It's Mr. John Campbell.
Who?
Mr. John Campbell, physiotherapist. So his question is, at what period in the young athlete's journey would it be good to begin inculcating mental acuity? So I guess mental acuity training, where would you recommend inculcating that in a young athlete? And that's your final question for now.
Okay, final question of the day. So like I said, at the beginning, so there are different stages of development. What a child does between 0 and 5 is different from 5 to 10 is different from 15 to 20. If you are starting a mental strength development program with an athlete, I've seen it where you can start as early as 7. But you're just introducing, they could be introducing many different sports. But the athlete starts with goal setting, where they write every day the goals that they want. It could be the goal they want for the year or the goal for their future. Say, I want to play for Chelsea, Premier League, FC. You writing that every day from 7, and you in fact end up playing for Chelsea, FC later in life. You can show them, I've been writing this every day since I was 7. They can do engraving, which they see their favorite player on YouTube and they're following them. They study that player, how they train. Cristiano Ronaldo takes 1,000 shots every day. So yes, as young as 7, you could start, and you just introducing interest in it. They might find that they have interest in another sport, but you don't want to go much younger than 7 when you're starting. And it varies between boy and girl. It could be 5 for the girl and 7 for the boy.
All right, Dr. Hamilton, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll move on. Just to make a quick point, persons on the YouTube, just a reminder again, if you want CME certificates, please do put your name in the chat so we can see. Put your name the way that you want to print it on the certificate. That way we have it on record, so to speak. Or if you can join the Zoom, we do have space. If you can join the Zoom, that would be great as well. All right, moving on.
All right. So I'd like to thank Dr. Hamilton again. All right, so our next presenter, I'm going to be introducing her. As we all know, it's the adage that says experience teaches wisdom. She'll be presenting on her experience as a veteran in the business as a physiotherapist. Her name is Angela McIntosh. She's the managing physiotherapist at Royal Rehab Physiotherapy Services. She has a Bachelor of Science in Physiotherapy. She has been a member of the association for many years. Since 1980, she has been the president for the Western branch for many years. She was the president between 1998 to 2015. I believe she has volunteered for almost, if not all, the major sporting events that we know, to name a few: boys and girls champ, Western Mile Relays, World Junior Champs, and the list goes on. So without further ado, I'm going to ask her to share a presentation of experience on load management and the impact on the athletes that she's seen. Angela McIntosh.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to try and share my screen here. Oh. No, it's not that one. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, we are.
Need to go to slideshow now.
Yes, all right. I just want to thank the association for giving me this opportunity to share. And the previous presenters have done such a great job. They've laid a foundation. So I will just quickly go through my presentation because they have already gone through some of the technical things. Oh. Bear with me here. Okay, everybody seen that? All right, so I am going to be doing mostly anecdotal, looking at the developing athlete. And you might wonder why I have, one of our top swimmers here in the middle. We have some gymnasts and we have a shot putter. Because in order for the athletes to get to the peak and the height of their career, they have had to start somewhere. And so I am going to be mostly looking at the young athletes and giving some anecdotal stories. All right, and mostly children to early adolescent, because those are the groups I've been seeing in the last 20 years. All right, let's go through a little background here. Can you see that? Right. Okay, in recent years, we've noticed there's been increased participation of children being encouraged, especially in football, track and field, swimming, gymnastics. We see more field events being done, baseball, basketball, cricket. They've been encouraging children to take part. And this is not only worldwide, but in Jamaica. And it's a phenomenon. And there are so many youth organized sports now that it's hard, especially for me, to keep up. I mean, when I started out in helping in sports medicine many moons ago, we mostly just did track and maybe swimming. But now, and football was one of the sports that was very popular at the time. Now we have so many other sports and involved in children. The child or adolescent athlete may select a sport with inadequate or inappropriate conditioning, coaching, and the safety methods available because they're young and in the primary school level, they just want to have fun and just participate because it's something that they can do for physical activity. However, as they become more involved in sports that is organized by either the schools or their clubs, this increases the risk of macrotrauma and repetitive microtraumatic injuries. And the previous presenters, Jamie and Romario, went through all the technical aspects and scientific aspects of that, right? So you're quite aware of that. However, we celebrate the performances, we tend to lose sight of a number of things our young athletes are facing. And this was one of the statements that was made by one of our great coaches, world-renowned, the Honorable Glenn Mills, we would ask the questions. Are athletes really overworked? Are they overtraining? Are they overload? But he felt that they were being overloaded, and he wrote this article in 2012 to the Gleaner, and it brought to light at the end of the ISA championships for that year that the athletes did very well. It was one of the best performances, but he had seen what could have happened because there were a lot of athletes who ended up with injuries, which they had previously, and their full potential was not going to be realized so that they could move on to the elite level. And so this was something that, you know, was concerning to him. And as sports medicine technicians, we also are concerned, not that we think that exercise and loading is not important, because we know that stress is good for you, but we are concerned at the other end of the spectrum. And so that is why we're attacking this subject today. All right, what is overtraining? It has been stated before, but I'm just looking at it from a very maybe too simplistic view. It is to lose condition or to spoil condition by too severe athletic training. So we know that physical activity for the young athlete is good, but it's when it gets into the severity of it that it raises concerns. We know that training by its very nature involves repetitive stresses, and that is good. And we were shown what the physiological stresses can be, what it does to the bone structure, the muscular structure. And as unique athletes, as the child is a unique athlete, and hence we have to consider all the potential risks which might interfere with their development. Because if I can think of swimming and gymnastics, those children have to start from a very early age in order to be skilled and to move up the line. And their career can be very long, because in order for them to get to the Olympic stage, they have to be train all this time up to age 16. Because I remember when Alia went to her first Olympics, she was just 15, 16 age group, right? So the level of maturation, which was alluded to before, the social identity of the athlete as a child, and the social awareness is something that we have to consider, right? Who am I? I mean, I'm part of this sport. You're with other swimmers, other athletes. The level of maturation of the athlete at the time. We know that the girls tend to mature a little quicker. They go into puberty before the boys. And we have to look at all that maturation, sexual maturation, physical maturation, and their awareness to the social skills that they need at the different levels. And we know that, as Mr. Hamilton was telling us, that the children have different needs between 5 and 10, as to 10 and up into early adolescence. Also, the adult influences on the athlete. The athlete is dependent a lot on those around them. Their parents and the coaches, they influence the sport that they go in, and they influence the way things are done. They're the ones who manage them overall. So the adult influences in their life is very important. Unlike the more elite, more developed athletes who can have a choice. The children don't really have choices. The child or adolescent's capacity to tolerate stress, and we alluded to that already, that their ability to tolerate stress is not as efficient as for an older athlete or the older adolescent, right? So we have to look at that. Okay. Okay, so we know that we have some very, very bright very skilled athletes on the track. And they started from in primary school and throughout their career. They're now 15, 16, 17, 18. And they are unique and special. And we want to know that as they go through this development and this process, that they get the best of care and they remain injury-free. We know that that's not possible. There's always the risk of injury, but our role is to ensure that they complete their time in high school and they're able to progress and move onto the elite part of their career. Okay. So we look at also the concerns for the physiological differences, which was already spoken about by our previous speaker, so we won't go into too much of that, but the changes that are occurring, the physical changes that occur in the young athlete, in that they're growing at a different rate. Sometimes they grow so fast. When you see them today, you come back the next term, as was alluded to before, they have growth spurts. And I just want to give a little story of one of the athletes that I saw many, many years ago in Western Jamaica. I was placed at Savannah, and we got athletes from Petersfield, Mannings, but one of these athletes, she came and she was having pain all over. Now, at the time, I was kind of naive, not as experienced as I was then, to know that she was a gangly 13-year-old and she was having growth spurts. So we sent her to the orthopedic surgeon saying, what could be causing all this pain? Why is she feeling like this? Not knowing that it's because the muscles were getting stronger and growing at a different rate from her bones. And I foolishly said, well, maybe you're gonna have to stop track, and she was in class 3 to go into class 2. And I said to her, maybe you need to stop, but only to find out that it's a good thing. We treated her, we did what we could for her, but she continued to develop and she continued to improve. The pains went and she got stronger, and only to know that in a few years, she was one of our top 400 hurdlers, very successful. She was from Mannings. Psychological immaturity, as was alluded to before, the child athlete, they are emotionally vulnerable and psychologically immature. And so we have to take that into consideration when we manage them in terms of the training programs we give them, and know that they might react that it's too much coach, they can't deal with it, they cry easily, especially the young ones. If they lose a race, they're not able to manage it. So we have to be aware of this emotional vulnerability and be able to manage them. Now, some of the areas of concern for the athlete, as a unique athlete growing, is that they have cardiac issues. If you, as Jamie did a good presentation on the heart and what happens in exercise, I won't go into that, but concerns occur in that intense exercise and the heart of children is not new. We know that adult competition involves increases in heart output, and more research needs to be done as to the extent of changes which occur in the young child and early adolescent, right? There was a time, especially where I'm going to talk a little bit about swimming, because many years ago, we had a scare in that one of our top athletes, I met him at Carifta, I think in 2003. He was he couldn't have been more than 10, 11, 12. And then when I saw him about 2 years after, he had grown so much, I couldn't believe it. He had developed, he was looking so strong, and he was doing well in the pool. And then it was such, I got the news that while in training, he collapsed. And by the time they took him to the emergency room, they tried to resuscitate and do everything, but he was gone. His name was Matthew Hilton. And it hit me because he was one of the athletes that I developed a relationship over the years. And then we couldn't understand. Tests were done to see, you know, what the autopsy, what could have been. They found an anomaly. But after that, there was a scare. Everybody in this pool, all the swimmers now were worried. And we know that everybody did cardiac tests, but we know that swimmers, because of the cardiopulmonary exercise affects their cardiopulmonary system, that they do have enlarged hearts. But does that mean that because of the excesses of their training in the pool and the increase in their heart size, that they're gonna just drop down? No, but these things happen. But it makes you concerned to know that, you know, that this can happen to an athlete, and not necessarily because of any overload or any training, any overtraining or abuse of them in the pool. So after that, measures were taken by the association and the schools, and parents were more proactive. They made sure that the children had done their medicals, make sure that they were fit for the next season. Musculoskeletal injury, that is one of the areas that us as physiotherapists tend to see mostly. When we go to the track and field meet, we see a lot of young, especially, well, I know at the primary school, championships in the West, which is where I'm more familiar with, and the high school Western champs and prep championships. We see a lot of children who come in with injuries. And we know that some of it is because of overtraining or overuse, improper training, as well as the gear that they wear, the fact that sometimes they haven't been doing anything, and then for sports day, they run, and then because they're good at sports day, they just move them into doing the track and field meet, but they're not prepared. And so they have injuries, and we see so many of them coming in because they're just not prepared, right? So we know that certain aspects of the growing athlete may lead the child to be prone to such injuries as tendinitis, strains, sprains, and stress fractures. And we spoke about stress fractures before, and you saw how that would happen. Now, here's a picture of one of our primary school. This little girl is not more than 8, 9, and she ended up with an ankle sprain, and we had to tend to her, right? So, okay, nutrition. Why am I featuring one of our top swim coaches, Coach Jackie, and this is Alia Atkinson, in that when I traveled with swimming, I was really amazed in that how organized they were at the time. This is at the 2004 Olympics in Athens. And we know that nutrition proper nutrition is critical for both health and optimal sports performance, as well as hydration. Coach Jackie was always a stickler and vigilant about the swimmers' meals, and that they must remain well hydrated, because she knows that if they weren't well hydrated, no matter how well they trained and how she prepared them, then they would be more susceptible to injuries. I found it amazing in that before she went on a trip, like whether we went to Carifta, CC Can, if it was in a Caribbean country, or CISC, she would try and arrange with a restaurant to provide meals for the athletes, and she would make sure the portions were right. She'd always be so a stickler for their nutrition. And we know that that plays a very important role in the performance of our athletes and to prevent them from risk. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit Let me backtrack a little. Oh, sorry. Bear with me a little. I'm going forward and not back. Okay, all right. So we're gonna look at a few injuries, but before I get to that, we want to, some of the other concerns apart from nutrition, sexual maturation, which we spoke about, intense training may delay sexual maturation because we know that sometimes the girls start their menses late. And I had this experience when I went to one of the swim meets in that I didn't know. That will show you how in those early days, I was kind of naive in that I didn't realize that if the girls had started their menses, sometimes they were given tablets to stop them from having the menses, you know, while they were in competition, in intense competition. And so we know that the intense competition sometimes and the training can give them amenorrhea. And so I thought it was just a simple case that they were having the amenorrhea because of the intense training, but actually it was because of medication that was taken. Thermal regulation is also another concern in that children have different responses. They generate more heat on exercise and their system is not efficient in dissipating this heat. As the skin, the surface area is less than adults and they tend to have problems, especially on a hot sunny day. And what I found happens to our young athletes, you know, the primary school and early adolescents, when they have the meets, is that they're placed at a higher risk of heat injury in hot, humid environments because of the time that the meets are held. And so we had to advise the organizers that they shouldn't have the meets throughout the whole day for these primary school children. They need to have a break so that they are not running in the heat of the day. All right. I would just like to talk about an experience I had with this athlete who had an overuse injury. He was a male. This happened in 2014. He was age 14 and his sport was football. He came to me in the clinic. He was referred by a private practitioner and his diagnosis was MCL, medial collateral ligament and medial meniscal injury. Now, when he came to me, he was having a lot of swelling and pain and he had had this injury for a long time. The background to this was that he had been at one school in Western Jamaica, in St. James, and the coach saw the potential and they recruited him to another school in Montego Bay, right? Because he was talented and he was doing very well. But for some reason, he had had this injury and it was there getting worse. So when he started playing for this school that recruited him now, he really couldn't manage. His performance dropped and everybody couldn't understand. So they eventually got him to see the doctor. He had a MRI done and his injuries were such that he needed to have surgery. Now they sent him to physio to see if we could strengthen him or we could do anything about the swelling and the pain, you know, because he had to be playing with a brace and he wasn't managing. But what happened was that the injury was something that he had had before. He was encouraged on speaking to him to just play through. You will be all right, man. And he had done this for the last football season. And now the new season was starting in September. He had been recruited to this new school. And now he was not able to perform. And the sad thing about it was that he was left in a problem because his parents weren't able to pay for the surgery. The school wasn't willing to take up that. And so as a developing athlete, to me, it was such a sad case. And it stands out in my mind to know. I really don't know what eventually occurred, because they were back and forth, you know, with him. He had the physio, but physio wouldn't have been the answer for his condition. So we did what we could, but he needed more than just patching up. He needed to have surgery. Okay. So, all right. And this is not the footballer, but it's just to show you that the amount of stress that can occur with them playing long hours. Not only that, if they're not properly prepared and they never developed throughout the season, if they get an injury, it wasn't dealt with and it stays there until it gets out of hand. Okay, case number 2. This was a female young athlete. She was age 11 and she was seen in April of 2013. She was seen by the orthopedic surgeon at the Savalomar Hospital and sent to the physiotherapy department. Because they know that I tend to see the athletes, then she was referred to me. She was diagnosed with medial epicondylitis. Her history or complaint at the time was that she started experiencing pain in her right elbow. For some time, she had been throwing the shot put, but the pain was getting worse over a 6 weeks period. And she and her mother were concerned and that she was not able to participate in the upcoming competition. Apparently, and I didn't know this at the time, she had traveled and represented Jamaica as a junior athlete, the primary school level. And she was devastated that she was having this injury and is not getting better. Examination revealed of swelling and tenderness in the affected area, and she had positive tests for tennis elbow. Management, she was given ice therapy, heat, elbow brace, and was applied deep tendon friction. We tried to advise her to rest. And over this 6-week course that I saw her, we started gentle exercises that she could tolerate. However, she didn't want to discontinue the activity because her mother said she represented Jamaica and she couldn't stop. But I said, but if she continues, her condition will only get worse because it's an overuse injury and it's the fact that of how she's throwing. And I don't know if the technique is right. We never got the coach involved because she was from one of the schools way up in the hills. The outcome, after a couple of weeks, her condition settled and she did not return to training. However, she decided to take up running. And I saw her at the primary school championships in the May, and she was quite happy because she was now doing the sprinting event at the primary school meet, and she was happy. So that turned out good for her in that she was smart enough to know that, okay, I can't manage to do shot put right now, but I can do something else. Okay. This article, the same article that I alluded to and showed it from the beginning, that was written by the Honorable Glenn Mills in the Sunday paper. And I quote, he said, a couple of years ago, under sustained pressure from the Sports Medicine Association, ISA was forced to limit athletes to the number of events they do, because then Class 3 athletes were asked to do up to 7 events by their coaches. And what I want to bring this to you is that we know that athletic performance has been one of our greatest and pride. You know, it has been the pride of Jamaica. Our athletes have done us proud. But if they are to get to the other level from high school, we have to make sure that we do the things to not overwork, not to overload, so that the risk and recognize the risk that they're exposed to during their training. And as was alluded to before, we got enough instructions on what to do and what not to do. So as an association, we have been plugging for the athletes who have overuse injuries, whether it's to make sure that the playing field services are up to par I live in Western Jamaica, and I know that, but that's one of the big problems, in that the fields at the high schools, they're like minefields. They're just uneven, stony. A lot of the athletes who come for therapy, whether shin splints or muscular injuries, strains and sprains of the ankle, hamstring, apart from the fact that they might not have prepared properly, but the surfaces that they run on. I remember one year at the Western Track and Field Championships, boys and girls championships, athletes could not afford, their coaches and the school didn't have the resources to give them each a new pair of shoes, and they had to share shoes. And then every single one of those athletes on that team had shin splints. And I know it had to do with the training surfaces and the fact that they were using each other's shoes. So there's so much we can continue to do. And in taking care of our young junior athletes so that they get to the next level.
Excuse me, Mrs. Mark, or time is out?
Yes, okay, I'm finishing up now.
All right, great, thank you.
So we know that it's not just, we have athletes from all different organized sports, swimming, track and field, gymnastics, and the capacity of our athletes to do more it's amazing. And we have to guide them. And the glory, I just want to leave this quote, the glory of young men is their strength, right? And nothing beats experience. Nothing beats experience. And some of the guidelines and recommendations that come from the FIMS, the International Federation of Sports Medicine, children and young adolescent athletes should be coached by individuals who are knowledgeable about training techniques, equipment, and physiologic changes. Children should never be forced to run through the pain of their injury, prevention, and early treatment. The child athlete should avoid early specialization, which Mr. Hamilton spoke about, and we know that because they'll suffer from burnout and they'll lose interest. The child athlete deserves special considerations as it pertains to the risk. So we need to always have that in the back of our mind as we go forward as a nation, promoting these talented individuals, because we want them to move from the junior level to the elite level. And that is my presentation, and these are my references, and I thank you for listening. Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you very much, Ms. McIntosh.
Mrs. McIntosh.
Mrs. McIntosh, yeah, I've been made wiser, trust me, and I really appreciate you sharing those underground experiences with us. I think they're very, very valuable for us to learn lessons from them. At this time, I was going to quickly ask if anyone has any question that they'd like to ask our presenter.
Hello.
Who's that? Coach Alvaro? All right, I guess you have the first question.
You make it sound like me enough. That. But I met Mrs. McIntosh last year at the Jamaica in Open Water Foundation, and it's refreshing to hear how much she talks about swimming and her work with swimming. Basketball does not have enough or baseball overhead use of the shoulder than swimming. And, you know, Matthew Hilton, we have a Matthew Hilton trophy in honor of Matthew Hilton. He would have been the best thing coming out of the primary school.
Yes, great. I didn't know. Great, great.
Yes, we oftentimes see a lot of prep schools bringing out the swimmers. You know, I don't know if you remember me from Jamaica in, but your presentation
yes,
is very good. Seeing Jackie Walters, you mentioned hydration. For most, I think actually Ashley Brown in here, my coach, my assistant coach. Big up Raman Walton. You know, I'm a full-fledged member. Dr. Brown has brought me into the full circle of sports medicine, and we access every arm that there is of sports medicine. You know, you spoke about the hydration, and I don't know how many coaches are in here can preach hydration, but Jackie Walters herself did a study. Nobody was allowed to bring water to the pool, and in a 2.5 hour training session, the weight loss was between 3 to 5 pounds.
Yes, I remember that study. She shared it with me.
Pause for emphasis. Yes. And the nutrition, you know, it's just so refreshing, and I wish we could have more of these with the swimming community. Track and field coaches are here because the emphasis on injury. I have a swimmer, my daughter, who, if her eyelash hurts, oh gosh, I have to take her to Dr. Diallo because she knows that pain is a sign of something. And, you know, we need to get more of this out there because, as you mentioned, the girl just needs to train harder and swim more is the mentality that I grew up with. But have learned otherwise thanks to Ramon. Sandra, I see you. You know, the whole guys in here, and I will never miss one of your seminars, Dr. Hamilton. Keep up the good work. Presentations are very well. I go forward with more after every one of your series. Thank you for these presentations.
Thank you.
All right. I saw a hand up, Coach Richards. Not Richard, Coach. What's it called?
Hi, how you doing?
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, that's me. A very great presentation, ma'am. It was beautiful. I enjoyed every last bit of it, and just listening to your presentation actually brings me back to why I became a strength and conditioning specialist. Just watching the amount of horrible training from I was a kid in Jamaica, it made me want to be a strength and conditioning specialist to deliver a good system to our kids. Because as I was talking to someone the other day, I had to remind them that we're in the business of taking care of children and growing them into adults. And with that said, we have to create appropriate protocols to help balance their growth. And the case study that you used about the young lady who was tall and gangly and had her body change where her muscles were a lot more shorter than her bones.
Was Kelly Spencer? Kelly Spencer, yeah, she was.
I know. I kind of figured that. I was looking back, and I know Dr. Diallo has been running around the country testing people. Do we have a standard testing protocol or performance protocol for our athletes? Do we use a standard testing protocol on a yearly basis for our athletes? Is that something that has been developed, or is it being developed? I know Dr. Diallo is doing some good work, but that's the question. Like, do we have standard protocols that we utilize to recognize where these kids are and then gradually build them up, especially coming off the summer break where we see a lot of them go anywhere between 3 to 5 inches, actually in Jamaica, 1.5 to 3 inches growth. Do we have that?
Well, recently the Western branch did a pilot to start for pre-preparation season. The association itself is thinking of doing it throughout the island, but we did like a pilot in Montego Bay recently, and it was successful. in order to test the athletes to see where they're at before they start the season.
Yeah, because that's
But
something that
Mr. Thomas and Miss McIntosh, they were coordinating it, so they would probably can answer more about it than I can, because I was not there, but I know they know.
Yeah, because it's kind of surprising to see how we're training these kids, but there's no preseason, off-season protocols being utilized to make sure that our kids are properly evaluated and then given the appropriate load system. So as I said before, appropriate load throughout their bodies. Because I feel like that's one of the reasons why a lot of our kids are getting hurt. Not necessarily that they're being overtrained. There's no two ways about that. But the overtraining is as a result of improper evaluation techniques or lack of evaluation to say, hey, based on your height, your weight, your body, this is where you're supposed to go. And I know sometimes when kids get taller, their performance go down, but
yes,
I think there's a tremendous amount of value into it. So actually
Marlando,
answer
is
the
there
question.
anything else you want to say about that, Marlando or Audrey?
I can say a few about it. I think Diallo probably would be the best person, but as Angela was saying, we did a periodic health evaluation in Montego Bay recently. I think I understand the question in terms of looking at a standard evaluation. We had split the assessment into different parts. So we had musculoskeletal, and we had functional assessment, and then we had the ECG. Now, under the functional assessment aspect of it, Diallo was the one who spearheaded that. So in terms of the resources that he used to identify what we're going to be assessing, he'd probably speak best to that. Under musculoskeletal, I knew it was a team effort. So it wasn't necessarily that we found this standardized evaluation for the musculoskeletal. We all put together based on our expertise and came up with something that we thought would encompass majority of what we would want to identify if there are issues. So I would want to say no, but I'm not the best person. But we didn't use one. There wasn't this standard form that we said yes, this is used and this is ideal. No, we created something per se based on the resource.
Are you guys familiar with the functional movement screening, FMS?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we know of it.
Do you guys use that as a part of your evaluation battery?
We didn't, you know.
Yes, I want to jump in dialogue, pretty please. Can I?
Yeah, man, go ahead.
Yes, Richard, I recently learned that there's an actual certification for functional movement screening. And since 2018, Dr. Diallo Brown, Dr. Jody and Simpson was at the last presentation. The Kaizen Swim Club in September, we do a functional movement screening. We also do Dr. Paul Wright, the Heart Foundation ECG, where something looks wrong, they do the echo. And that allows me to know who I can apply intensity training to. The sad reality is that I usually get about 33% take up out of my entire club. Our plan this year was to expose their entire swimming community to it, because left side, right side, vertical jump different, and we then refer them to Diallo for balancing and strengthening. But in the swimming community where I work, there is no standardized test. What happened is that if you make the Carifta team, they do an ECG. But how do I get you to make that Carifta team? By applying high intensity training. We will be doing Doc, I spoke to Diallo just last week about incorporating the Jamaica Sports Medicine Association in our, well, I was going to say our club, but I wanted to expose the entire swimming community to it. Because this way, Richard, we know who, everybody's a lefty or a righty. We can then recommend. That's all we can do. Recommend strength and conditioning for balancing to, the scapulas and the rotator cuffs in the event of swimming, the adductor brevis. No, but I am moving towards that direction and will continue to communicate with Dr. Diallo, the educational guy in this region, about incorporating it in swimming.
Yeah, how about the baseball guys? Are the baseball guys still on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, how you
baseball.
doing?
Leon Taylor, Jamaica Little League Baseball. No, Little League Baseball, I'm the district administrator here. And it's highly regulated because we protect the boys and girls who strive to play baseball and learn the game. And there are very specific rules that you have to follow when it comes to players and pitchers, in particular, right? Because if you're, as a coach, you've got to keep an eye on your pitcher, right? If he's on the mound or he's pitching, and just one movement you see, that's not right. You take him off immediately, all right? So you don't take chances. Pitch counts are strict. And then you have rotation, because if a pitcher can't pitch 2 consecutive days, providing that he pitched a certain amount of balls. So we're very careful with that, because baseball has lost a lot of arms. I saw that happen in Canada. I just share. I went to a tournament once, and the elite tournament, and this kid here, he pitched the Friday. Then I went back the Saturday morning, was pitching, and behold, the team made the finals and was pitching on the Sunday. I walked over and I said to the parent, I said, why don't you take this kid off? Because he won't have an arm at the end of this tournament. So we take very good care of the players when it comes to Little League Baseball in particular.
How about standardized testing? What is the standardized testing you guys use to evaluate their readiness for competition or their readiness for training?
Well, okay, I'll give you an example. We start baseball. The skill sets are taught at a young age. So we're now embarking on the age 9 to 12. Because that's where you started. We lost the whole, due to the pandemic, we lost a whole lot of kids. But now that we're starting at that age. So, there's no real testing. As the coach, we've got embedded in the coach, or in the coaches, that it's imperative that you know the history of the kids, you watch their movements. One question I asked, we had a program started at Harvard Tree Primary School, is I asked each child why were they coming to baseball when football is there, and the answers that I got was like, I dreamt of playing the game, never had the opportunity before, and these are 9-year-olds, right? So we don't really evaluate them at until they get to competition, the competitive age. We've got a senior boys team. We've got a senior boys team, and we're hoping to take them to Florida in the next month to compete. Now those boys, they're at the age now where you have to totally evaluate them, and it's just a matter of seeing the position the kids play. Again, pitchers, catchers, they throw the most baseballs. The pitcher and the catcher would throw the most.
Coach Taylor, sorry to cut you. I have to really cut you. We're definitely well over time, but we understand. Right. We hear the points that you're making. It's really underscoring all the points that all the presenters have been making. About
the presenters have been good.
Right, and it is coming down to the whole thing of load management, monitoring load. Every single presentation that has been brought so far, really underscoring those points. Unfortunately, we're definitely well over time, so we're gonna ask the Western branch to go ahead.
Thanks anyway for hearing me out.
You're most welcome. Most welcome.
All right, I'm gonna ask Mr. PRO, for the Western Branch, Mr. Aaron Attis, does a vote of thanks.
Good evening, everybody. So we have come to the end of our presentations for today. And as such, I would like to say thank you on behalf of the Jamaica Association of Sports Medicine, by extension, the Western Branch. Big thank you to everyone who took the time out of their busy schedule to spend the time with us today. I want to say special thanks to our presenters. First presenter, Mr. Jamie Barnes, followed by Mr. Romario Gill. Then we had Dr. Hamilton, and then we follow up and close out with Mistress Angela McIntosh. Special thanks again to our presenters. It was really informative, and I'm sure that everyone who took the time out to actually log in and spend the time with us today will leave with learning something new or something that they can apply throughout their career or whatever field they might be in. So thank you guys for tuning in. The Keeping Pace seminar is a series of seminars, so we should have another seminar coming up in the next quarter. So you can keep that in mind. And again, thank you everybody for tuning in.
Yes, Mr. Arthur, thank you. We do have another one coming up. Our next one is going to be in November. Date to be confirmed, but it should be in November. And we'll once again be online. Thank you very much.
Good.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you once again for attending. Thank you for your patience. We did go over time, but all those really productive discussions for these presentations. Again, thank you once again. Again, to persons who are not members of JSM, I think we've set instructions as to how to receive your CMEs, CEUs, whatever you call them. Members, once you're here, you'll receive your CMEs as well. All right. Thank you once again. Thank you, Western Branch. You can go ahead and close out.
All right, I think it was. Thank you and bye.
All right, goodbye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Well done.
All right, thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.